Here at Chez Garbage, we pride ourselves on our ability to find the freshest, most exciting new trash of each anime season. But any chef worth his garbage water knows there's a time and place for reheated leftovers, too. And that time is December, when ad rates are way up in the Restaurant Association? Which is why we cooked up this massive casserole of every piece of isekai and fantasy trash we've served since opening our doors in 2021 for you to snack on while you study or binge your way into a nice dozy food coma. Of course, packing all these roasts together like this does mean that some of our patented, extremely specific segues won't make a whole lot of sense anymore, but if you'd like to enjoy those in the context of their original menus, you can always go watch the hottest trash playlist over on Mother's Basement. I mean, look at the archives in our basement. Smooth. Anyway, without further ado, please enjoy stuffing all this fantasy garbage down your gullet. And if you're looking for something to wash it all down, I highly recommend picking up some Gamersupps for 10% off at gamersupps.gg/basement. That's 10% off with the code basement or by going to gamersupps.gg/basement. By the way, Gamersupps is an energy drink if you didn't know that, and if you didn't know that, you should probably spend more time in restaurants. This is a restaurant, not a YouTube video. You're in a restaurant. Now, on that note, this wouldn't be a proper trash anime list without at least one isekai on it. Drugstore in Another World, the slow life of a cheat pharmacist, is nothing if not honest in its overlong isetitling. It's about a pharmacist who's stuck in a fantasy world and runs a drugstore using cheat knowledge like how to make dishwashing detergent to make dishwashing detergent that he then sells to the medieval people who would obviously want to buy that because it's useful. Also, boy, is it ever slow. Get ready for bleeding edge recurring gags like, okay, get this. Children are annoying and they like petting animals, right? So what if they did that to one of the anime girls with the animal bits? Oh, and the pharmacist guy, he gives all the things he makes these sensible descriptive names, but then the Ara Ara Ghost Lady secretary renames them to silly cute things that sell better. Not doing it for you? Well, I hope you like prop comedy. I made a stinky monster repellent spray, so now my werewolf mascot thinks I didn't shower. For some reason I made pepper spray, but ouchie, it got in my eyes. And who could forget the classic, oh no, super glue makes people sticky too. If you've always wanted to see low-effort Dragon Quest LARPers recite sitcom gags that were stale when I Love Lucy was on, you should probably be on a list, but this is the isekai for you. If not, it may still be worth watching, if only to find out what a true neutral, pure 5 out of 10 anime really looks like. Drugstore Isekai gets one standard steel trash can full of crackers, room temperature, lightly salted. Speaking of Garbo Isekai and weird sex stuff, I just created a segue that could lead into almost literally any anime. But today it's leading into the fruit of evolution. Before I knew it, my life had it made. Which is actually kinda similar in concept to So I'm a Spider, So What? After a god rolls up on a typical Japanese high school and enlisticizes all the students into a war with the Demon King, one geeky, unpopular kid ends up separated from the pack and must fend for himself in the harsh high fantasy wilderness, starting out from the lowest rung of the evolutionary ladder. Except, in his case, that doesn't mean a magical insect. Seiichi's just a short, fat, smelly kid whose bullies call him subhuman to be mean. And the thing about that is, do you remember the title of the anime? Those fruits of evolution are magical artifacts that allows whoever eats 10 of them to, well, evolve into a more advanced form. Like, the main waifu of the series is a big, pink gorilla who turns into a sexy cave woman after her evolutionary conditions are met, and when Seiichi eats the fruit and meets his, he just gets taller, skinnier, and less smelly. So, canonically, like, within the science of the lore of this franchise, those mean kids were objectively correct. He was literally subhuman after all. If that sounds weird and gross to you, yeah, it kinda is, and the deep unpleasantness of it all is only moderately offset by the fact that Seiichi himself is deeply unpleasant enough to kinda deserve being dunked on like that. Like, he is so mean to the Gorilla Girl just because he thinks he can't bang her. Until he clears the first dungeon and evolves into Kirito, that is, at which point he just becomes a generic boilerplate isekai protagonist like all the others. And after that, the show's just kind of fine. I mean, it doesn't have much of a plot to speak of, more a series of harem introductions framed around low-effort JRPG parody skits, but some of the jokes, like the Adventurers Guild being filled exclusively with weird perverts, are moderately funny in a basic low-brow sort of way. Well, until the scene swerves from lazy BDSM jokes into even lazier homophobia. And that is far from the only dated thing about this anime. Fruit of Evolution seems to be intentionally aiming for a retro Showa-era style of cartoon gag comedy. You know, like the original black and white Osamatsu-kun. And, I mean, it's not really funny most of the time, but something about that casually stupid style of comedy does make Seiichi's OP protagonist antics, his constant ass-pulling of new abilities, and his novel-length stat sheet a bit easier to swallow than they would be in a show that takes itself more seriously. Plus, the retro aesthetic almost gives the series a pass for its low-quality art and animation. Almost. And on the rare occasions when it fully leans into the over-the-top absurdity that retro cartoon tone allows for, Fruit of Evolution can actually be decently entertaining, even. I mean, what other isekai can you think of where the protagonist gets romantically entangled with his talking horse? Unfortunately, it doesn't hit such shamelessly ridiculous creative heights nearly as often as, say, the hidden dungeon only I can enter, but as far as trash anime goes, Fruit of Evolution does end up feeling similarly digestible to that series, if you can manage to stomach those truly awful first few bites. But why would you, when there's so much better anime and better trash out there to enjoy? I'm giving Fruit of Evolution 2 American high school dumpsters full of exceptionally toasty, intelligent design textbooks. If you're looking to laugh at a mishandled moe show, LBX Girls will give you way better bang for your buck. It also starts off in a Yu-Gi-Oh-esque world where everyone is obsessed with the same toy. In this case, pocket-sized, battle-capable modeled robots called LBX, short for Little Battler's Experience. Our protagonist, Yui, is the only person on the entire planet who has not yet caught the highly merchandisable fever. As the series begins, though, she finally cracks under the peer pressure, buys a toy robot, and gets instantly isekai'd into a parallel post-apocalyptic Tokyo besieged by giant robot spiders. Therein, she discovers that she's become an armor girl, able to wield giant versions of the tiny LBX weaponry against the mimesis threat, and joins a squad of other armor girls as she searches for a way home. It's a wildly convoluted setup for what amounts to a basic battle road trip series with a cast of generic waifus. For the most part, the plot is rote and predictable moe nonsense, but perhaps because of the baseline absurdity baked into its premise, mundane scenes and conversations often swerve into amusingly surreal territory. Like when a guy who's yelling at his dad for getting his girlfriend killed can't decide if he wants to take a cupcake with him when he storms out of the room. Also, the later flashback to said girlfriend's dramatic, tragic death is a laugh riot. And even when the show drags its feet through exposition and dialogue, which is most of the time, the fact that none of its characters really think or act like rational human beings infuses its slow moments with gently ironic humor. I give LBX Girls 3 big back alley bins full of Gunpla boxes and gasoline. I haven't seen it go up yet, but if it does, it could be spectacular. By now, you should have a firm grasp on how this rating system works, so I will never attempt to explain it again, and if you ask me, I will yell at you. On that note, in discussing the brashest trash of winter 2021, one series is unavoidable. Not because it's particularly remarkable, but because if I don't say anything about it, a few very loud and insistent commenters will.
a lot. So, big fat content warning if sexual assault is a thing you don't want to hear about today. I won't get advertiser unfriendly or dwell on this for too long, but use the chapters if you want to skip over it. Redo of a Healer follows Kiaru, the healing mage in a generic Demon King battling RPG party whose fellow big air quotes heroes keep him hooked on drugs so they can use and abuse him, both for his incredible but traumatic to use recovery powers and, I mean, you heard the content warning. Kiaru discovers that his powers can be used to heal the world, granting him a temporal do-over at the moment of the Demon King's defeat, with which he plans to take meticulous Machiavellian time revenge on his abusers by letting them do it all to him again for 6 straight months. But after that, he pulls the reverse Uno card on the evil princess, erases her memory, and changes both of their faces so they can go defeat the Demon King on their own in secret and run through the rest of his revenge list while they're at it. It takes the kingdom like a week to track him down. Light Yagami, this anti-hero is not. It's a plot full of excuses, cliches, and holes you could drive Truck-kun through, centered on comically vile, paper-thin personalities, and built atop a laughably contrived fantasy world foundation. Like, this healing magic can regrow limbs, transform people's faces, steal their memories and EXP, and reverse time, but actually healing someone who passed out 2 seconds ago? That's impossible, guy. That one scene makes the near-missing tiny web fingers of Amazing Spider-Man 2 feel dramatic and weighty by comparison, but I don't know if it's all that meaningful a comparison. Sure, Redo of Healer fails spectacularly at telling a compelling or even sensical story, but it's not really trying to do that so much as it is constructing a series of quick, vaguely plausible causal links between staring at a wall and listening to music scenes. This isn't anime, it's hentai. Just hentai with TV-level production values that happens to be using a late-night broadcast slot to advertise its Blu-rays. I don't think there's much point in seriously criticizing a series like this for storytelling or subject matter. I doubt most people watching it are taking it very seriously. Anyone who is likely won't be receptive to criticism, and it's not like it's trying to make a serious statement with or about its questionable content. It's just there for people who are into that sort of thing. And off television, there is way more shocking stuff catering to those same tastes. If they're your tastes, that's between you and Haruhi. But if you're looking for a good shit watch or endurance anime, you can do a lot better. Or worse, I guess. To be fair, though, it is a topic of the now, and you can also do worse, or, better. There's definitely some solid unintentional comedy to be found here, like when Kiaru takes Flare into hiding and changes their names to Kiaruga and Freya.
And over here is Mr. Hilter. Good afternoon.
Also, one of his healer powers, what's a YouTube-safe way of putting this? It, turns his icing sugar into rare candy. The jokes practically write themselves there. I've heard of grinding before, but this is ridiculous. Fill in the blank like it's worth the XP. Hey baby, I've got your rest bonus right here. Depending on your outlook, the way the story bends over backwards, phrasing, in order to morally justify its protagonist is pretty funny too. Like, every villain needs to be even more cartoonishly evil than a slave-owning serial predator, so if Sugo from SAO is a 9, they all start at 11 and just keep getting louder from there. That said, all the bad guys are bad in pretty much the same way, just more. They don't get much screen time either, and the remaining plot that isn't, plot is padded out with a lot of slow, basic fantasy questing stuff you've seen 1,000 times before. For a show that tries so damn hard to be spicy, it ends up being pretty bland most of the time. Considering all that, I'm giving Redo of a Healer a rating of 2 soggy, smoldering trash cans and 1 wastebasket full of moldy tissues. There's definitely some dumb fun to be had here for those who can stomach the subject matter, but that's about it. Perhaps it would have fared better, in my estimation, had this winter not blessed us with an infinitely more ridiculous and creatively contrived fantasy harem anime. The hidden dungeon only I can enter is an adventure story set in a Dragon Quest-esque world where everyone is born with innate skills. Noir Stardia's skill, Great Sage, allows him to instantly know literally it all by asking questions of an omniscient wizard who lives in his head. Sadly, he's never been able to take full advantage of this because that knowledge comes at a terrible cost. Agonizing, brutal headaches that can only be cured by making out with a hot girl, like his childhood friend, Emma, who is constantly vocally aching for it, but not his sister, Alice, who is constantly vocally aching for it. Smart man. Follows the rules. After a rich bully steals his dream of being a librarian, Noir's only fallback is to become an adventurer. So he uses Great Sage to uncover a hidden dungeon in which he can grind for loot and train against rare monsters, and once he gets there, is led by psychic whispers to a beautiful, buxom, blue-haired woman chained asleep to the walls. Via telepathy, she introduces herself as Olivia Servant, a famous world-class adventurer who was sealed by the chains of death after defeating a demon here 200 years ago. Those chains will kill her if removed, so she decides to make Noir her apprentice while he figures out how to get her out of there and pass her unique skills on to him. One of these skills, Bestow, allows its user to pass skills on to other people. Another, Editor, allows its user to edit the conditions of any other skill. The last one, Get Creative, allows its user to create any skill they can imagine, instantly at the cost of their life force as measured in LP, which is a pretty hefty toll, but there are ways of recovering life points. Noir just has to do things that give him life, like eating a hearty meal, finding gold or treasure to satisfy his earthly desires, or touching some boobies. I don't have to tell you which of those comes up most often. So to recap, this protag-kun has the power to know literally anything and do literally anything, with the drawback that these abilities will hurt or kill him if he's not constantly experiencing ecchi scenes. You may not think that's a drawback, but just imagine asking your adventuring companion to suck on her ear while a monster is trying to eat both of you, and you'll begin to understand what a fearless hero Google Stadia really is. It doesn't take long before girls are fighting over him. As soon as he turns his first quest in and proves his stuff, Adventurers Guild receptionist Lola decides she wants to have a very close working relationship with him, which bugs Emma, but not that much. She's not saying, "Get your hands off my mans," just, "Hey, leave some room for my hands." And that's a good attitude to have because every other woman they meet also wants to jump Noir's bones, which totally makes sense. Sure, he's so dense that he can make out with a girl every single morning before school and still be convinced she only thinks of him as a friend, but, look, he's protag-kun, don't question it. That seems to be the driving logic of this entire show, actually, and it tends to be pretty tongue-in-cheek about it. Noir's Emoto has magic ahoge that automatically detect when a new harem sloot has entered his orbit, for example. And at one point, he picks up a lucky accident skill that dramatically raises his odds of fumbling his way face or hands first into more life points. Then, realizing its immense, terrifying power, he immediately edits it so it won't interrupt any important story scenes or, like, ruin a funeral or something. Spoofing harem tropes is nothing new in anime, of course, and none of these jokes are particularly clever. The real comic gold in this dungeon lies in its efforts to set up fan service moments, because despite having built-in excuses like that lucky accident skill and those magic headaches whose only cure is a heaping dose of tongue, the hidden dungeon only I can enter is never content to rest on its laurels or rely on cliches, and it gets real wacky with this stuff. In one scene, a combat instructor rewards Noir for his excellent dodging by sitting on his chest, and then punishes him for complaining about it by sitting on his face. Face sitting, by the way, is also a skill in this world. Lola's rival receptionist, Sarah, is an A-rank face sitter. Gotta watch out for those min-maxers. In another scene, to earn the money and life points they need to cure a death curse that Noir just happened to notice that one of his classmates was under by randomly scanning her, he, Emma, Lola, and an elf priestess named Luna, who, I can't stress this enough, just met them like 2 days ago, take part in a harem dog show run by a very divorced nobleman and his cult of incel shy guys, with the girls performing tricks like warming your master up when he's cold and planting 3 kisses on his lips simultaneously, which seems physically impossible. It's like a D&D Mad Lib filled in by a 12-year-old boy who just found out what sex is last week from an anime and isn't entirely clear on the mechanics yet, but nonetheless thinks the whole thing is pretty nifty. And while this show is substantially hornier in its scripting than even high school DxD, its production values are on average so low that it's rarely genuinely sexy, and even when it is, it never aims above a PG rating. So, with a few exceptions, this is the sort of hilariously trashy ecchi that anyone can laugh at without feeling too uncomfortable. Fun for the whole family when they inevitably walk in on you watching it. The series has some fast and loose fun with its fantasy elements as well. Goofy, weird monster designs and silly skill and stat-related jokes abound. Its cast is also generally fun to be around, even if they are a little flat in their characterization. It's not as strong a fantasy comedy as Konosuba, or even Suppose a Kid from the Last Dungeon Boonies moved to a starter town, but it is funny on purpose, and the intentional comedy helps to smooth out the weight between the most outrageous moments of contrived fan service. By the way, don't miss the after-credits scenes in every episode from 3 onward. They're really something. I'm giving the hidden dungeon only I can enter 4 steadily blazing oil drums for its uproarious unintentional comedy and surprisingly cozy overall atmosphere. For the greedy trash connoisseur not quite satisfied with X-Arm, it's definitely the season's next best worst thing. Of course, this wouldn't be a proper garbage tasting menu without at least one isekai as well, and this season, that isekai is Trapped in a Dating Sim. The world of Otome games is tough for mobs, which follows an ordinary Japanese geek guy whose little sister asks him to 100% a girl-oriented dating sim with RPG elements that she's been struggling with. And even though he hates the game and the asshole dudes he's supposed to hit on with a burning passion, he diligently devotes his entire spring break to clearing it for her, leaving himself so sleep-deprived in the process that when he finally goes to the store for dinner, he immediately trips down the stairs and dies. Then he wakes up in hell, by which I mean the world of that Otome game, where he must find a way to survive as an unimportant background character at the same magic academy where all the dangerous main character bullshit that he really doesn't want to get involved in is happening. The show's setting is a mishmash of some of my personal all-time favorite anime aesthetics. You got a fantasy world made up of floating islands in the sky with knights fighting in Magitech combat mechs based on ancient lost technology that comes from a fallen, full-on sci-fi civilization whose AI remnants are still hidden beneath the floating Earth. Of course, it's one thing to simply come up with a cool fantasy aesthetic, and another entirely to actually develop that concept into a believable, living world in which your story can take place. But the fun thing about this anime is it doesn't even try. You see, Trapped in a Dating Sim isn't set in a real place, it's set in a dating sim. A kind of bad one, made by people who knew that as long as they put hot boys in it, no one would really pay that much attention to the world's backstory details. So, canonically, the lore is just kinda half-assed and we have to live with it. Which I'm happy to do because, like I said, these are some of my all-time favorite anime aesthetics mishmashed together. But you know what is shockingly well thought out? The aristocratic political system that governs this world. It's not that different from aristocracies in our own world, really, save for the small distinctions that each duchy and barony is located on its own floating island, and that women hold all the power. Which means that men, like our strapping young adventurer of a protagonist, have pretty much only one possible career path open to them if they want a halfway decent life. Marry someone rich while they're still young and hot, and pray that their new partner doesn't turn out to be an abusive monster. So it's actually a full-on inversion of gender roles that shows dudes what being treated like an object feels like, and not just a generic fantasy setting where the queen's chair is bigger than the king's, like Shield Heroes matriarchy. And in keeping with that, a significant chunk of the plot is dedicated to our hero learning how to throw a decent tea party as he struggles to find a wife. It even takes priority over his dungeon delving classes, and the tea party instructor ends up becoming his manliest of manly role models. Of course, that dynamic doesn't last. It's an anime and people want to see giant robot fights, and by the end of the first arc, Leon's kicking all the pretty boys' asses in mech fights to defend the honor of a spurned lady in an elaborate social display that paints him as the villain society needs. And while he's doing that, the hot, rich student council president and a kindly poor girl with a heart of gold cheer him on from the sidelines. Later, the two will bathe together and talk about how great he is. So basically, it's my teenage rom-com snafu, but with mechs and fantasy skylands. It's quite self-indulgent and wish-fulfilling harem-adjacent stuff, really. Unconventional, but ultimately right in line with your typical isekai power fantasy experience. It is pretty clever how the show gets there, though. Leon's encyclopedic game knowledge doesn't actually help him that much because men are so oppressed that he can hardly take advantage of it beyond getting a giant robot and spaceship to be his servants. The best life he can reasonably hope for is one where he just gets to fade into the background and not be bothered by anyone powerful. But the thing is, he's not the only reincarnated student at the school, and the other one, a girl, has memorized all of the pickup lines from the game and is using them to turn the full husbando lineup into her own eternally loyal harem. This has the side effect of leaving the original protagonist and the antagonist of the game displaced from their own stories, with nothing else to do but form a harem around our hero, no matter how much unwanted attention that brings him. Trapped in a Dating Sim takes itself just the right level of seriously, where it's able to say and do genuinely interesting things and build up genuinely interesting three-dimensional characters, while also shamelessly indulging in pretty much every power fantasy trope under the sun, and somehow making it feel kind of subversive and original. Honestly, I'm not even sure it's right to call it trash, but it does have enough titty to qualify, and I wanted to highlight it here since I think I dropped the ball by not recommending it in the ones to watch. It's seriously a good time. I give this anime one dumpster full of gunpla kits and fancy tea bags with flames erupting 5 feet from its mouth and emitting an oddly pleasant smelling smoke. Now, speaking of isekai, if you're wondering what the Shield hero's been up to since he returned this season, the answer to that is fighting this big turtle. Not preparing to fight it, not traveling to get to the fight, not even struggling in an epic, drawn-out, multi-episode battle to kill the darn thing against all odds. No, they manage that in the first episode of the fight. But then it gets back up. Again. And again. And again. Imagine if the white whale part of ReZero was just the whale with none of the witch cult stuff, or the politics, or the personal growth on Subaru's part, but also its endless 8 from Haruhi. This is like 3 times worse than what you're picturing, and that was before the anime production committee got to it. Apparently, this stretch of the source material is widely considered to be boring for some reason, but it's also too plot essential to skip, and you'd need to change a ton to fix it, so instead, they just sped it up to get back to the parts fans actually want to see as fast as possible. However, in the process, they took something that was once merely tedious and transformed it into a nigh unwatchable jumble of fast-forward info dumps and quarter-assed fight scenes, thus ensuring that a sizable chunk of their casual audience will never get to those parts because the show got bad and they dropped it. And it doesn't help that since Naofumi's name was cleared, the show's basically turned into the riding of the dick hero like every other isekai. There's also a new girl in the squad, because of course there is. It's a new season of an isekai anime. What are they gonna do? Not expand the harem? Rishia is an extremely clumsy and insecure type of moe blob, and she wants Naofumi to teach her how to be strong so she can fight alongside Itsuki, the bow hero, whom she has a crush on. This is, by isekai standards, astoundingly deep, complex, and unconventional character writing. I mean, a girl having an interest in a guy who's not the protagonist? How's the audience supposed to project themselves onto that? Shield hero cleverly dodges this thorny issue by making Rishia deeply agonizingly irritating to the point that nobody would want to waifu her, a trait only amplified by the fact that we skipped the non-plot essential training arc that was supposed to make us sympathize with her. Instead, our first real introduction to her is when she and the gang go to the slave trader in order to make her now Fumi's slave. Voluntarily, of course, for the slavery EXP buff, you see, which she needs due to her unusually low growth rate, which is holding back her otherwise once-in-a-thousand generations potential as a martial arts prodigy. Though until that problem is solved, she is able to fight alongside our heroes and harness some of that potential by wearing high-level fursuits that give her lots of stat bonuses. I swear I am not making a word of this up. If the first season of Shield Hero was 3 dumpsters full of flaming Bud Light boxes, then season 2 is all that plus 1 budget fursuit trash compacted into a small, inert cube of dull gray aluminum and then placed inside an equally dull gray aluminum trash can. Now we are no longer speaking of isekai, though to the untrained eye it will be hard to tell. The world's greatest demon king gets reincarnated as a typical nobody is a fantasy anime based on a light novel where that thing in the title happens, except for the last part, because the demon king Varvatos actually gets reincarnated as a super strong, cool, and important guy who all the women are throwing themselves at all the time. And that cool, strong, and important guy's name is Ard Meteor.
What a stupid, phony, made-up name.
The reason that Ard wants to be a typical nobody in the first place is because in his old life as Varvatos, he was way too strong, and obviously nobody wants to be friends with strong people because they're so scary, so he was very lonely. And at first, when he's a kid, he still has trouble making friends because he's so awkward that they run away from him as soon as he opens his mouth, but luckily his parents are friends with this elf baron guy whose daughter is also really lonely, and she's scared of being friends for reasons unrelated to how strong he is at first, but then he kills some monsters that were gonna kill her, so she becomes his friend, and they're best friends, and they're probably gonna get married one day. And then they go to a magic school together where, on account of that incident and the reputation it gave him for being a super strong and cool and important guy, everyone wants to be his friend now, because obviously you want to be friends with a strong person so they can protect you from scary stuff. And you might think that contradicts the initial premise of the story, but shut up! Anyway, the only 2 friends who actually matter for plot purposes, and also plot purposes, are Irina, the cute, innocent elf girl who is his childhood friend, and Ginny, a succubus girl with no self-confidence who they save from this rich bully who treats her like property, and then they take her down to a dungeon to teach her speed magic, and after that, she has all the self-confidence, because that's how character arcs work. And she mainly uses that confidence to advocate for Ard getting himself a harem, because she thinks he'd look really good with a bunch of hoes hanging off of him, which Irina is vehemently opposed to, though that mostly seems to be on principle because she clearly wants it, and she clearly would not mind if Ginny watched. But she had better get used to the idea, and fast, because when her other best friend, who she has even though she's not supposed to have any friends, who is the queen, decides to reward Ard for saving the city from some demons who showed up around the time demons are supposed to show up in this kind of story, the way she decides to reward him is by having his baby, which she announces to her entire court within about 2 minutes of meeting him. But actually though, Irina doesn't have to worry about her because that's a fake queen, and Irina is actually the secret shadow queen of the country who has to hide her identity because she's a descendant of the evil gods who the Demon King killed to make the world good before he reincarnated. But even though he himself is that Demon King, Ard doesn't stop being her friend when he hears that secret, because why would he? That's stupid. They've been friends for years. Obviously that trumps some minor backstory detail when you actually know. You know what? This whole anime is stupid. It's just a dumber, hornier, exponentially boring or misfit at Demon King Academy that lacks the gumption to make its overpowered protagonist overpowered enough to loop back to being interesting again. I give it 4 industrial waste skips full of a complete printed list in 8-point font of all the things that would have been a better use of my time, lightly smoldering. We've decided to hit you with 2 more isekai. Or possibly 1 isekai that's airing twice a week. It's impossible to tell. This isekai, or isekais, is about a dude who gets reincarnated from Japan into an incredible magical world and finds himself gifted with fabulous magical powers that grant him dominion over monsters and magical beasts alike, which he can call to his aid in combat and other scenarios at will. With their help and some other fabulous magical powers he happens to have, he's able to fend off a group of sinister rookie killers at the local Adventurers Guild and polish off a quest to single-handedly defeat an incredibly high-level monster that everyone else was scared of, making a name for himself as a hero in the process, but also calling more attention to himself and his abnormally fabulous powers than he might otherwise like. Okay, I kid. I know The Black Summoner and My Isekai Life are 2 different shows, probably. I mean, they've got 2 different entries on the MAL database, so they've gotta be, right? Unless my trash supplier's trying to pull a fast one on me. No, we know where his wife works. He wouldn't risk it. And if you look closely, I mean, very, very closely, there are some clear differences, I think. For example, My Isekai Life's Yuji is a plain old monster tamer, whereas Black Summoner's Kelvin is, as you might expect, a summoner, a job class so rare and amazing that he's got to keep it a secret at all costs, lest the nations of the world start vying to control his balance-tipping powers. And okay, maybe Yuji also has a stupidly high magical power level that he tries to keep a secret, but that's more because it makes other people uncomfortable generally and also gives them weird expectations for him. So that means that his reason for hiding his power level is personal rather than geopolitical. So, different shows, I'm pretty sure, right? Or, wait a minute. In both, or is it just the one? The main character's first monster familiar is a surprisingly OP blue slime with a real cute, boisterous personality, so maybe not? No, wait, right, I forgot. There's 6 slimes in My Isekai Life with adorable costumes, and they ride around on this big, strong direwolf fella who's ironically a big fraidy cat under that facade. Also, they do a Bohemian Rhapsody parody in the end credits that's just adorable, whereas Black Summoner's only got the 1 slime who gets real big, and he rounds out his party with a bunch of other different monsters who all have their own unique personalities. Yeah, it's all coming back to me now. Kelvin's some gamer kid who gave up most of his memories of our world in exchange for even more OP stats than he would have been isekai'd in with normally, which, doesn't really cut down on how much he acts like a typical Japanese nerd or makes typical Japanese nerd isekai protagonist pop culture references, so I'm not really sure what the point of giving him amnesia even is, but in short order, he ends up finding a new character-defining passion in this world, fighting strong opponents, which he sates by seeking out strong monsters to add them to his party, so that's kind of a fun character dynamic. And those monsters all have really fun and distinctive personalities. So, in slightly longer order, he's got a whole JRPG party's worth of voices in his head doing Tales skits all the time whenever he's not out on adventures, which, on the whole, gives the show a real chill hangout sort of vibe that I enjoy a lot. Conversely, Yuji's deal is that he used to be an office worker who was office worked to death by a company that took his skills and enthusiasm for granted. Who he was before informs everything about how he acts in his new isekai life, and the legitimate trauma of being used up and thrown out like that, which the anime captures beautifully through these delicate, stylized watercolor flashbacks, is a big part of why he wants to hide his power level in the first place. He's worried that if people know what he can do, they'll just use him again. But he's also the sort of guy who can't help making connections wherever he goes, and he frequently leaves new friends behind, their lives forever changed whenever he moves on to a new, strange fantasy locale, so it's not like he's uninvolved in the world. And it's that multitude of side characters who end up getting most of the development in my isekai life story, while his many monstrous traveling companions end up being more mascot-esque than the fully realized dynamic characters who live in Kelvin's head rent-free. The Slime Squad and Wolf offer comic relief and commentary in a consistent voice on whatever the story of the week happens to be, but they don't really come off as having a story of their own to tell. They kind of remind me of the talking bike from Kino's Journey, actually, and I can draw a lot of comparisons between this story structure and that one, although my isekai life obviously has a far more robust overarching plot going on with the conspiracy stuff, so it probably won't stay in a vignette format for long. But yeah, that's those, I'm pretty sure, 2 isekai in a nutshell. If you're looking for a breezy power fantasy to shut your brain off for a bit, I reckon either one will serve you about as well as the other, though which you will personally prefer is a matter of taste. If you have a penchant for quippy dialogue and characters with big personalities, Black Summoner will probably be more your thing, whereas my isekai life will please those of you who crave creatively efficient visual direction, fun animation, and strong dynamic action scenes. At least, I think they will. If they are, they. I might still be gaslighting myself here. I give these isekais, or isekai, 1 dumpster full of slightly expired Coke cans and 1 dumpster full of slightly expired Pepsi cans, both still in their respective boxes and slightly on fire. Futoku no Guild at least gives my editors something postable to work with. Marginally, since, you know, them outfits and them camera angles. It's one of them anime where you can tell the clothes are only still on because the audience is into that, but unlike Grill, it at least has a bit of a plot between all the plot about a super OP adventurer guy who wants to quit and enjoy a normal college life. Unfortunately, he's the only one who knows how to work his particular molesty monster slaying beat, so now he's got to babysit a crew of grossly incompetent cute girls as they very slowly learn the ropes, sometimes by getting tied up with ropes. If you've ever wondered, what if Konosuba, but only darkness, you have a sick, sick mind. And Futoku no Guild is here to answer its every sick desire. But you'll have to find those answers somewhere other than an official streaming platform, because yeah, they learned their lesson after interspecies reviewers. And I learned my lesson about putting buxom dog girls in tight clothes on YouTube after Slave Harem in Another World, so that's all I've got to say about that. And frankly, it's all anyone needs to hear about that before deciding whether or not they want to watch it. Futoku no Guild gets 3 Spirit Halloween dumpsters full of unsold sexy D&D costumes that are just completely soaked in gasoline, plus some of those recalled Paw Patrol fire helmets with their ironically faulty flashlights turned on. Now, if you're in the mood for something a little less intense, but that you'll still feel at least somewhat ashamed of when someone walks in on you watching it, that wholesome fantasy harem I was talking about, Beast Tamer, might just be up your alley. Beast Tamer follows the standard I can't believe it's not isekai template C, wherein the main character is a former member of the stereotypical heroes party who leaves due to a personal difference of some kind and discovers his untapped OP magic potential approximately 5 seconds thereafter. The specific personal reason this time around is that the heroes party is full of jerks who only value combat ability and thus think of our pushover protag Rain as dead weight because all his beast taming powers are good for is doing Disney princess impressions, scouting any area or situation in a matter of minutes, and carrying all their supplies. So when I said they're stupid jerks, I mean they're really Stupid jerks. Anyway, in the opening scene, they bully our protagonist about what a useless, underpowered dweeb he is, and kick him out on his ass with only the shirt on his back because the party earned all his equipment. Then, on his way out of the building, some local urchins run up to tell Rain what a swell and nice guy he is, and also how everyone in the community already thinks the heroes are jerks, just in case you were worrying there'd be any narrative tension around what that does to his reputation. And then, on his first ever solo quest, he just happens to run into a magic cat girl, an ultimate species of beast with massive strength and even more massive gazongas, who informs him that he, alone in his class, has the power and potential to tame such legendary creatures, who will then lend their own incredible powers to him in turn, giving him a super buff body and magic and stuff. And, why, yes, they are all hot girls. However, did you know? So, yeah, Rain immediately lands in a new party full of badass Beast Girl supermodels whose favorite hobby is validating him, and gets better stats than all the bullies at school in his old party, all because he's just the nicestest guy ever, plus secretly super talented and cool. And one day he'll show all the fools by killing them with kindness. Or violence, but only after they inevitably give him no other choice because they're just too stupid and prideful to realize how better than them he is. Yeah, its waifus may not be that naked, but at the end of the day, Beast Tamer is still just as much of a juvenile male power fantasy as any half-baked battle harem you can name. But hey, at least it's a vaguely pro-social power fantasy with pleasant characters and a cozy, low-drama hangout vibe in the same rough ballpark as quintessential quintuplets. One guilty pleasure, hold the guilt. I award Beast Tamer one Build-A-Bear bin full of fire-retardant fluff and kitty cat plushies with a gap the exact size and shape of your body in the fetal position right in the middle of the pile. The Eminence in Shadow, which is just undeniably excellent on a ton of levels. Strong atmosphere, great action scenes, consistently fun animation. It's a solid production through and through with a ton of obvious talent and passion behind it. But that doesn't change the fact that our main character is surrounded by so many beautiful elf and animal girls in jiggly spandex bodysuits that the only reason I didn't lump this in with the harem anime is because that's literally an army. Or the fact that the story is basically just a vehicle for making all of his wildest middle school dreams and delusions come true. And I don't mean that figuratively. Protag-kun literally threw himself in front of Truck-kun on purpose because he wanted magic powers, which is just the first step toward his ultimate multi-lifelong goal of becoming so insanely OP that not even a nuke can kill him, which he's already accomplished by the time the story proper begins. But that, too, is just another stepping stone toward his ultimate goal of becoming not an anime superhero, but rather the apparent anime background character who's actually the all-powerful leader of a secret society of anime anti-heroes who protect the world from the true threat lurking behind the curtain. A conspiracy that manipulates good and bad guys alike to its own sinister ends. Which doesn't really exist, of course. That would be way too convenient. He's just playing pretend that all the regular bandits he's beaten up in his new world are secretly connected to a plot to resurrect the Demon King with the blood of the hero's descendants or whatever. Or so he thinks. In reality, every last random detail that Sid made up about the Cult of Diablos, including its name, is 100% accurate. They really do control the governments of every major kingdom from the shadows, and his organization, Shadow Garden, really is the last thing standing between them and complete global saturation. The only point he got wrong is that the girls they're kidnapping and experimenting on have demon blood, not hero blood, but that doesn't make them any less effective as an army of sexy magic ninjas once he's recruited them. So all of Sid's chuny delusions have come true, and He's the only one who doesn't know it. What a great comedic premise. But that premise, too, is just a stepping stone toward a series of increasingly insane and unpredictable plot escalations that you need to see to believe. There is nothing I love more than watching a talented team of animators take goofy, self-indulgent concepts like this to their logical extreme, and boy howdy, this anime delivers on that. I give the Eminence in Shadow 3 golden garbage cans full of Haruhi fanfics and bottle rockets with a flaming truck-kun on a direct collision course. Arifureta, if you didn't know, is back this season in full force with slightly upgraded visuals. Now it looks like the contents of your high school DeviantArt folder fighting baddies that fell out of a PS3 game, and very downgraded horny camera work to match, which is both disappointing because the Queen's Blade level shamelessness of the original was incredibly hilarious, but also a relief because it means there's way less my editors will need to cut around to avoid getting this whole video demonetized. Luckily, the story side of the production hasn't lost even an ounce of its shameless wish fulfillment juice. Hajime's got himself a magic submarine with magic torpedoes now, plus these cool crossbit things straight out of Gundam that hang in the air around him, blocking shots and adding extra pew-pews to all the usual blam, blam, ding, 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 kapow, of course, all his waifus are still in tow too, and also, when they finally meet Miu's birth mom, she decides she also wants a piece of the man her daughter is calling Papa. Plus, that one hot teacher's still thinking about their mouth-to-mouth resuscitation session, and the camera's spent an awful lot of time focusing on Sword Girl. Even at 4 members, this harem clearly still has the potential for exponential growth. Also, the in medias res teaser that kicks off the whole season shows Hajime fighting a literal angel, so that's probably going to be pretty fun when it happens. And a lot of the dungeon crawling, monster fighting adventures our heroes have been on so far have already been a lot more fun than they were in Season 1. On the whole, Season 2's action has been considerably more competent than it was before, which more or less offsets the relative lack of hilarious horn-dogging this season. Also, Seaman's back. Everyone loves a hot load of Seaman. Really, there's not much else I can say about Season 2 that wouldn't just be regurgitating my last roast, though. Arifureta Season 2 still earns itself 4 high school dumpsters full of all the notebook doodles that you would totally murder most people if they ever laid eyes on them, on fire, naturally, because you set the fire, but then one of your drawings slipped out into the breeze and your crush picked it up and it was an extra spicy drawing, so now you also are on fire because you set the fire. But this time, the drawing was slightly less spicy than the one from last season, but still spicy enough that you set yourself on fire, though. Next up on this roast menu, the strongest sage with the weakest crest is the sorta isekai-adjacent fantasy anime that you get when a writer designs a magic system, and that's it. That's all the world-building work done, also all the character development, and especially all of the plot, which is about secret demons who have tricked all of mankind into using that magic system wrong, since Protag-kun reincarnated 1,000 years ago to make us easier to conquer, fooling our entire species with such devious, uncrackable aliases as Devilish. Because of this extremely clever and subtle subterfuge, everyone in the world now thinks that the strongest sage's crest, the hand-to-hand battle mage crest, is the weakest. But it is actually the strongest crest. That's why the title is what it is. You see, there's 2 types of magic in this world. Incantation magic, which is slow and bad, and wordless magic, which is fast and good, obviously. But the demons infiltrated the upper ranks of adventurer training schools and convinced everyone that repeating a lengthy incantation in the middle of combat is infinitely more practical than pointing at a thing and then magic makes it go boom. And all of the people went along with that because if they didn't, then there would be no one to underestimate the protagonist on account of something he can't change, and then be amazed when he defies their bigoted expectations, and then they immediately start worshipping him as a god and begging him to have babies with them and or all of their female relatives. Not that being underestimated ever actually gets in his way. Like, dude has an exclusive audience with the king at the start of episode 2, wherein he is offered as a prize for his unrivaled heroics, considered equal in value to an entire fiefdom, a magic sword that he made a couple days ago for fun. And on top of that, when he just straight up guesses that demons will be launching a full-scale invasion of the city in 3 months based on one piece of evidence, the king is just like, yes, that makes complete sense. I will trust you, small child I just met, with the defense of my entire nation, based on a thing that you made up and I have no way of verifying. Please take some of our national treasures to construct an anti-demon barrier. And the national treasure that he chooses just happens to be another magic sword that he also made thousands of years ago before he killed most of the demons and then reincarnated entirely so that he could roll a new character build with that crest from the title. So, like, the whole weak crest prejudice thing that's so important to the plot that it's the title is less of a significant societal obstacle that our hero has to overcome, and more a basic plot device that allows for him to be constantly underestimated and then surprise guys with how cool he is in every scene of every episode forever. That is all this entire anime is about. Aside from the magic system, of course, which is, to add insult to injury, also extremely bad and boring. You see, what makes a magic system interesting, and I just read the first Mistborn book, so I'm totally an expert on this now, isn't the cool things that it allows your heroes to do, but rather the limitations that it imposes upon them, which they must cleverly overcome to maximize that coolness. You can math out all the JRPG stats and magic particle physics you want, but at the end of the day, a magic system in a story needs to be a storytelling tool first, and wiki filler a far, far distant second. It must serve, first and foremost, to create interesting problems for your hero while giving him or her enough wiggle room and tools to come up with novel and interesting solutions to those problems. I cast Big Fireball. Oh yeah? Well, I cast Magic Reflecting Orb is not that. I'm sorry, but anally categorizing and calculating aspects of a soft, hand-wavy, do-anything system does not add anything to its narrative utility, actually. This show is pretty much just the misfit at Demon King Academy without any of the personality or aesthetic sensibility or sense of humor or self-awareness or originality. I give it 2 back alley bins full of soggy, slightly stale crackers and white bread, plus a few stat tables torn out of a Final Fantasy strategy guide. Out of all the anime I have to roast today, the next one probably makes me the saddest. Orient is the latest, not-so-greatest fantasy battle manga from Shinobu Otaka, the creator of one of my personal favorite anime, the Arabian Nights-inspired Maji. It follows some little guys who go around fighting much, much bigger guys to save their fantasy Japan land from an evil alien demon army that has taken over and forced everyone to mine the rocks that they eat, and also everyone's been re-educated so that they think magic samurai, aka Bushi, are big doo-doo heads, because only the Bushi are able to beat the aliens, and if everybody bullies them, then they won't have time to fight the Oni, I guess. Our fiery red-headed hero Musashi doesn't believe everything he hears in mining slave school, though, so he's decided to turn his pickaxe into a katana and fight back against the Oni alongside his childhood friend Kojiro, whose father was a Bushi warrior. But of course, Kojiro got bullied real bad for being a Bushi, so he's gonna need gosh, at least 10 minutes of soul searching before he's really ready to join that revolution. Orient doesn't have a particularly gripping premise, nor are any of its characters all that interesting. Plus, right away it starts leaning on recycled plot beats from Maji that make it seem really lazy, but the prospect of Shadow of the Colossus scale action scenes does at least have the potential to be a lot of fun. Unfortunately, the first thing that you'll probably notice about its anime adaptation is that it's not, actually animated most of the time. Also, when it is, it kind of looks like complete ass. Okay, the occasional shot does rise to the same approximate quality level as your average 5-minute trigger shitpost, but that's about the best you can hope for here. Basically, they took a manga that had exactly one thing going for it, and then removed that thing, which is, I would argue, not an ideal approach to adaptation. I'm giving Orient one standard issue steel trash can full of bent up fake katanas from your local night market. I think the best way to approach roasting the next lump of garbage, Fantasia Sango Realm of Legends, is to simply describe a bit of its plot to you while showing you how much effort went into animating that. It is Romance of the Three Kingdoms time in China, and because there's this purple gas what turns people into monsters, a goddess or something with big titties appears before a warrior dude in the middle of generic anime forest clearing number 427 and says, "Hey yo, chosen one, you have been chosen, go fight them monsters." Then he walks a bit of a ways down easy-to-paint dirt road number 69, where he meets an honorable lady warrior musician who's like, "Yeah, I'm down to fight some monsters," followed by a half-monster girl who fuels her monster powers by sucking down monster farts. And she's all like, "Sure, I'll fight with you, but that doesn't make us friends. I don't have friends, 'cause I'm a monster. An angsty monster." Then they meet a slightly sassier warrior dude who's also a bit cowardly and doesn't want to fight no monsters on account of all his friends died fighting monsters. So his tea bucket comes to life and starts insulting him, and I guess that's our mascot now. And then Big Titty Goddess or whatever is like, "Hey, fuck your PTSD, fight monsters or die." So now we have the obligatory whiny member of our JRPG party, and the team is complete. And together they set out for a random forest clearing with a monster in it, and they fight the monster, and then the half-monster girl eats all his farts and grows horns and makes a fart tornado to beat him. Roll credits. The next episode sees the crew hunting down an even more dangerous, crafty type of monster in generic anime Chinatown number 6, while they learn to be friends and trust each other and junk, and also we learn that there is a big titty evil fortune teller lady who is using the evil farts to make even more monsters behind the scenes. And I don't think I really have to tell you anything that happens after that, because this show is literally nothing but tropes. Fantasia Sango is what would happen if Jim Davis took all the character writing skill and attention to background detail that he pours into every Garfield strip and made a shonen battle anime instead. I give it one standard issue steel trash can full of bent up fake Chinese broadswords from your local night market. The first episode of She Proclaimed Herself Pupil of the Wise Man has gotta be one of the most tremendous betrayals of basic storytelling principles I've seen in my entire life. Fully half of it is spent exposition dumping about this cool future VRMMO where the players can do whatever they want and even run their own countries. So some of the best Magic users got together and made a Magic country, and there's these 9 badass top-level players called Sages who protect it. Then one of the Sages, Old Man Danbolth, goes off to fight an army of terrible CGI goblins and terrible CGI demons with his army of terrible CGI knights over a very, very out-of-place J-pop insert song. Then he comes back and the king shakes his hand for a job well done, and over this picture of them shaking hands, the narrator cuts in to inform us that right after this happened, all of the sages disappeared and the entire world was thrown into chaos. This episode had 3 minutes to spare for a bad CGI music video, and 0 for depicting the inciting incident of the anime's entire plot. Also, it apparently had 4 minutes to spare right after that for a sloppily animated, completely dialogue-free montage of a little girl waking up in a field in Old Man Gandalf's clothes, sniffing a flower, and then walking into town. No, really, that is all the plot points that happen in that montage. It goes on for 4 minutes. I don't understand how it's that bad. The next episode, we find out this little girl actually is Old Man Gandalf, who passed out in the middle of using a cosmetic item to character design his ideal woman. Don't think about that. Then he woke up what turns out to be 30 years after everyone else in the MMO got themselves log horizoned, which I guess the narrator just forgot to mention. And now she's got to pretend that she's Danbulf's pupil instead of Danbulf, and her name is now Mira, because the other kingdoms would laugh at their kingdom if their greatest warrior looked like a little girl, even though she has all the same one-man army powers that made her a badass in the first place, and also their king perpetually looks like a 12-year-old boy. On top of all of its fundamental storytelling failures and embarrassing production values, Pupil of the Wise Man also bears the dishonorable distinction of creating quite possibly the least funny, horny reaction character in the entire history of anime, this green-haired mage girl with the glasses. At one point, Mira splashes holy water on a mirror, and for some reason, this makes the glasses mage girl start uncontrollably humping her staff, so the elf girl in their party has to put her in a headlock. Another time, Mira says she has a secret, and the concept of her having a secret makes the mage girl so uncontrollably horny again that the elf girl has to put her in a headlock again. It's not just the repetitive nature of the gag that gets me, or even the transparently lazy attempt to offset the inherent creepiness of a Mineta-style character by putting the horny words in a female mouth. It's the fact that just trying to figure out what this girl is even horny about makes even me, with my thoroughly hentai-poisoned brain, feel like I'm having a stroke. Another recurring joke of this variety is that Mira has a smaller bladder than she's used to now, so she sometimes has to run off to take a specifically steamy piss in the nearest bathroom. The second time this happens, it is literally in the middle of a dungeon, an ancient, cursed necropolis with indoor plumbing. What'll they think of next? An isekai anime that's actually good? I give She Proclaimed Herself Pupil of the Wise Man 4 dumpsters full of manga and anime with very large disclaimers on the back declaring that all of the characters in them are totally over 18, plus a mountain of old MMO free trial CDs, all burning bright like it's the 4th of July. The first of your 5 isecourses for this evening, the Pottage, attempts to freshen up the otherworldly formula that even trash connoisseurs are growing tired of at this point in a simple yet potentially effective way, by doubling the heck down. Summoned to another world for a second time asks what would happen if a typical Japanese youth who got called to be the savior of a fantastical parallel plane, then sent back home as a reward for his good deeds, got called back again to do it all over, this time in front of all his classmates, with all the OP skills that he had the first time, of course. It's an Isekai New Game Plus, if you will, or Arifureta without any of the setup or interesting personality, if you won't. Now, at first, the answers it finds to that question are fairly entertaining, like when the aloof captain of the Royal Guard assigned to train all the classmates realizes who Protag-kun is and immediately goes full Konosuba darkness horny sub-mode for him, begging him to sit on her. That's pretty fun, as are the bits of him sitting around with his old adventuring party, reminiscing about the good old days and trying to figure out how to bring the good old days back, in moderation. Unfortunately, from episode 2 onward, in which Protag-kun agrees to escort a jeweler's granddaughter to the Demon Queen to return a brooch that he originally gave her as a present, but then she had to get it sent out for repairs, it quickly becomes apparent that catching up with old pals is his primary method of solving all the anime's problems. Which I guess makes sense. I mean, he's already saved the world and made friends with all the important people, so all he's got to do is call in some favors with everyone who puts respect on his name and flex on the few fools who don't until the day is saved, but that doesn't make it a fun or interesting plot device. The concept of this show certainly has potential, but the execution here is just excruciatingly boring. Isekai again gets one wastebasket full of emails to former co-workers clearing up minor miscommunications that were printed out and framed for some reason. I left that last show on the menu for the Isekai purists, but I'd honestly recommend substituting it for our I can't believe it's not Isekai option, The Legendary Hero is Dead. A light yet deeply trashy dish steeped in the delicious flavors of anime girl thigh and daikon radish, which are practically indistinguishable from certain camera angles once you slip a stocking on them. That's our hero, not to be confused with the legendary one, radish farmer Toka Scott's favorite hobby, because when you're a thigh gap fetishist in a small town and your caked up childhood friend won't give you the time of day because she has a crush on the legendary hero, there's not much else to do. He does get a chance to win Yuna's heart when the village is attacked by a demon, but before he can lure it into a pit trap with sumptuous barbecue, the hero swoops in to save the day first, then swiftly gets killed in that pit trap because, like all shonen protags, Sion Blandon's a sucker for meat. Fortunately for the otherwise doomed world, Sion's traveling companion, Henri the Necromancer, has a backup plan and plants the soul of the clever warrior who bested the hero in combat by accident inside his magically destined body to carry on his destiny of sealing off the demon realm for good. Unfortunately, not only is Toka a total scumbag, he's also got the power level of a literal baby and can't even muster the magic to keep the skin from falling off his borrowed bones, let alone get his legendary sword up. Not even when he needs to get it up to save that childhood friend who seems to have that Fire Force girl's curse where she can't keep her clothes on for any given fight scene. Now, as it's finding its feet, this anime's humor is pretty bog standard, if a touch more morbid than your typical ecchi fantasy harem thing, and its pacing remains kind of a mess throughout. But by the time we're introduced to the villainous thigh bone fetishist who wants to bring equality to the world by turning everyone into sexy skeletons, it's revealed its own very distinct and fun personality that seriously sets it apart from most of the genre and most isekai, and fully lives up to its infectious banger of an OP. I give The Legendary Hero is Dead 4 flaming coffins, the trash can for people, full of stupid sexy root vegetables and bootleg Necronomicons. For the Poisson course, we are, of course, serving up the fishiest title of the season, My One-Hit Kill Sister, an anime that gives you everything that name promises and so much more, both in the sense that it is exponentially incestier than you can possibly imagine, starring an older sister down so bad for her little bro that she literally beats herself into a coma just to grope him again after his fateful date with Truck-kun, but also in the sense that it goes way harder than a show with that concept has any right to. As far as jokes go, the one of puny little protag-kun paying OPO Nachon in heavy petting sessions to protect him from big scary monsters becomes routine like halfway through episode 1. The bit where everyone else gives him credit for all the cool stuff she does and all the ladies are constantly gagging for him is even more predictable than that, and adding a second, slightly less OP demonic older sister figure who also wants to jump his bones as her rival doesn't exactly mix things up. But then, anytime you're tempted to roll your eyes at any of that, you risk missing some of spring's most insanely beautiful action sakuga. When OPO Nachon f***s an orc or dragon or slightly less OP demonic surrogate Nachon up, she them up like Goku going to town on a dude who just killed Krillin. And that's just for insulting her beloved little bro. Woe betide any fool who actually lays a hand on him or gets in the way of him laying hands on her. Fans of gorgeously gratuitous cartoon violence will not want to miss this one. Even if the quality of the production and animation in the last couple episodes doesn't quite live up to the first few, the storyboards and general compositions of the action scenes are still phenomenal. I give my one-hit kill sister 3 dumpsters full of flaming piles of money and Alabama marriage licenses. If the true meat of the trashy isekai experience lies in how it panders to the wishes and anxieties of its nerdy loser target audience, then by far the meatiest entry that I can serve you this season has got to be I got a cheat skill in another world and became unrivaled in the real world, too. In introducing its protag kun Yuya, cheat skill makes sure that target audience knows exactly 2 things about him. Firstly, he's a really nice guy, the nicest guy, TM, who will bravely step in to save a beautiful milady when she's being hit on and grabbed at by convenience store thugs, and no one else will say a word. Secondly, he is the fattest guy, and also the ugliest, possibly even uglier than he is fat, and everyone bullies him for being so fat and ugly, especially his own family, because they're all hot, and his uggo chubboness brings great shame upon them. Also, his grandpa, who was the only person who ever saw past his ugly fatness to like him ever, bequeathed his house to him, and only him, which made his family hate him even more and disown him harder. So now he lives alone, subsisting on a part-time job that he loses on middle school graduation day because it conflicted with his scheduled beating by his siblings for being too fat and ugly. So he punches the bathroom wall and in the process uncovers his grandpa's secret treasure room with an isekai portal in it, like you do, and upon stepping through that portal, he magically inherits another house, this one magic, on the other side, which also has a bunch of OP magic weapons in it, and you get some OP skills just for signing the deed. And by using those weapons and skills to kill the OP monsters that can't cross his OP magic fence, he levels up a whole bunch, causing him to spontaneously become superhuman and also tall, skinny, and hot when he goes to bed. Which of course pisses off his bullies and siblings even more when they see him again in high school, but before they can beat him up for that, the milady that he nice guyed out of trouble earlier shows up in a limo, and it turns out she's the daughter of the principal of the bestest school in Tokyo, where he's invited because he's such a nice guy and he doesn't think he'll fit in there, but then everyone wants to be his friend. Not long after that, he goes to the mall to get some nice clothes to go with his new nice face and body, and gets scouted to be a model by a photo shoot that happens to be there, but then the male model that he was brought in to replace shows up and is a jerk and a bully and hits on a milady model who didn't want to be hit on, so he beats that guy up and everyone claps. Then his middle school bullies show up to his new high school with their motorcycle gang to beat him up and kidnap the hot principal's daughter who wants to be his girlfriend, but he beats them up instead and everyone claps. Then he gets a magic puppy dog in the other world and takes it for a walk in the park where he runs into that milady plus the model milady who start low-key catfighting over him, but then a purse snatcher snatches a purse, so he and his dog have to catch him, and say it with me now, everyone claps. Also, while all that's happening in the real world, a princess in the other world is on his ass to marry her, and every monster that he kills just conveniently drops very specific and useful things like a portable transforming magic hot tub. I honestly don't know if I've ever seen an isekai this nakedly self-indulgent that wasn't hentai. Heck, the way it's barely animated with loads of digital parallax camera pans over oddly shiny static artwork, it's easy to mistake for hentai, even if the most sexual thing Cheat Skill IRL actually does is the author furiously rubbing his own self-insert protag kun raw. The friction of which specifically is what ignited the full-blown 5-alarm dumpster fire rating that I have chosen to award this glorious piece of anime. That, regrettably, makes a perfect segue into the Aristocrat's otherworldly adventure, serving gods who go too far. So I'm forced to commit a slight fox pass here by serving the season's cheesiest dish before the sorbet. If your main gripe about a typical isekai is that Protag-kun doesn't get his dick ridden nearly enough, metaphorically speaking, then this is the anime for you. If you mean that literally, try Slave Harem. After getting between a convenience store robber's knife and some cute girls, Kazuya Shina finds himself reborn as Kine von Silford, third son of a generic noble family in a generic fantasy world where he enjoys a generic upbringing, learning magic on the down low as he's doted on by his parents and a sister so obsessed with him that she literally has a special obsessed with her brother title on her status screen until his baptism at age 5, when all 7 of the world's gods give him level 10 blessings, which is perhaps a little bit OP considering that most people get 1 or 2 blessings max and their levels are supposed to cap out at 5. So even when his parents hire both a dollar store Eris Greyrat and a dollar store Roxy Sylphie hybrid to tutor him in magic and adventuring and stuff, all they can really do is sit on the sidelines talking about how awesome Kind-sama is while he goes around one-shotting everything from goblins to dragons to adventurers guild bullies. And that's just the start. All told, like half this anime's entire runtime is just people praising Kind for things he did, or maybe if the writers are feeling spicy and want to attempt some comedy, complaining that he did stuff too awesomely, with the occasional break for a cute rich girl to beg him to marry her for being so awesome. The first 2 of those actually happen at the same time, when he saves the 10-year-old third princess and her duke's daughter bestie from a whole mess of orcs, which also results in the king giving him an entire barony and a mansion. And it's a touch uncomfortable watching a child who's mentally at least in his mid-20s hit on and lose sleep over those regal grade schoolers, but the show does eventually balance that out, sorta not at all, with an age gap in the other direction by having the big titty fight slut captain of the guard, who's also a 300-year-old elvish princess, fall in love with him after he whoops her ample butt in a duel. Also, that big titty elf's name is, I shit you not here, Tijuana von Liebert. God, I love it when anime just throws European words in a blender. The wiki tells me there's at least one more fiancé inbound at some point, which would officially put Kine ahead of Ranma on that particular scoreboard, but it also indicates that his sister will eventually fall for a guy who's not him, so that's something. Though if they cut out all the scenes of people and or gods sitting around gassing Kine up, I honestly think this anime adaptation could have already caught up to that point in the light novels. Like in the episode where Kine invents sparkling wine and hamburgers for his mansion warming party, no less than 3 characters have their own separate Shokugeki reaction shots where they just absolutely shit their pants over how delicious both of those things are, which could get pretty messy, but then Kine also invented a magic bidet, which like 5 different people react to in that same episode. The series does have a few interesting ideas amid all the generic fluff that a better writer could have taken in some interesting directions, like how the god of commerce apparently grants divinely enforced patents, but of course it never hops off Kime's dick long enough to explore any of them. I give the Aristocrat's otherworldly adventure 2 dumpsters full of suspiciously stained couch cushions with like 3 factory defect Mushoku Tensei Nendoroids hidden somewhere among them. If you're getting tired of 2-bit generic fantasy landscapes rendered in 1-bit animation at this point, I can hardly blame you, but Kamikatsu, working for God in a godless world, is the perfect antidote to what ails you. From setup to setting, this isekai tale of a bodybuilding cult leader's son reincarnated in a world with no concept of religion after a ritual gone wrong is anything but but generic. Yukito didn't wish to end up in a world where ladies think handjobs are a CPR technique, but sometimes Lord Mitama works in mysterious ways. As for the animation part of the equation, that goes so far beyond terrible that it somehow loops back around to being good again. You might not believe such a thing is even possible, but I challenge you to look at this dorky buck-toothed CGI monster, this live-action footage of a guy driving a rice harvester with a dead-eyed anime face awkwardly pasted over his head, or all this pixel art that they use in place of actually drawing the action scenes, and describe this show's production any other way. The team behind this anime clearly realized early on that they didn't have the manpower or resources to achieve anything close to quality in time for broadcast, and thus opted to instead devote everything they had to creating one giant glorious shitpost, which turns out to be an oddly good fit for the off-the-wall story they're adapting. The world that Yukito has found himself trapped in isn't just devoid of any concept of God, it's also devoid of all the typical escapist trappings he's come to expect from the isekai that he watches and reads to escape from his life as the son of a cult leader. Besides the occasional monster. Really, it's devoid of anything to do besides tilling fields and getting plastered. Magic, or possibly sufficiently advanced technology, does seem to exist, but that's all in the hands of this tyrannical empire, which dictates the lives of its citizens down to the days they die. So when Yukito and his new villager buds run afoul of that empire by not dying on their preordained day, they gotta find a way to fight back against those OP magic-wielding knights, and fast. Luckily, he has God on his side, specifically Mitama, the god of his dear old dad's cult, who possesses the vast, miraculous powers to level mountains and even raise the dead. Unluckily, those powers are directly proportionate to the number and fervor of her worshippers, which currently sits at a big fat 0 on account of how much Yukito hates dear old dad. So the only way to bring those numbers up is to follow in dad's footsteps and start a cult of his own, using bribery, extortion, and good old-fashioned Barnum effect flimflammery. It's been ages since I've seen an anime premise, isekai or otherwise, this audaciously original. I think it could have been genuinely great if it weren't so aggressively, hilariously terrible. As it stands though, I've gotta give Kamikatsu one septic truck left on the tracks of the 7 p.m. Fireworks and Vodka Express. Am I Actually the Strongest is the thrilling tale of a worthless loser shut-in who died alone in his room playing some shitty mobile game, and now that he's been given a miraculous second chance in a fantastical world of magic and mystery, all he wants to do is exactly that again. Dude's magic level's so OP that appraisal spells literally can't count that high, and what's he do with it? Build an exact clone of himself to live his boring life of aristocratic luxury for him while he stays in his room all day watching anime.
詳細は省くが、現代日本のネット環境にアクセスできてしまった。
Pro tip, isekai writers, your audience wants to escape from stuff like that. I wish I could say I respect the commitment to never touching grass, but honestly, I don't, and I don't even believe it as a character motivation. I mean, the very first time this dude ever left the house in this world, he managed to magically dominate a sexy, spandex-clad dog demon into begging him to bang her, specifically so that she could make some milk for him to drink, because, oh, I forgot to mention, he was a newborn child at the time. You seriously want me to believe that a hikikomori otaku degenerate would rather conjure up a knockoff Nintendo Switch and turn his super genius polyglot Emoto into a magic iPad kid than follow the adventure line of an isekai scenario that went from 0 to and baby in 5 minutes flat? I call bullshit, but no, of course not. They're doing the same thing every fucking isekai does, where bro only gets out of bed in the morning for his adopted little sister, which, in a roundabout way, does eventually bring him into conflict with the Machiavellian schemes of his evil queen mommy, specifically because said Emoto gets obsessed with magical girl anime and demands he go fight bad guys in bad Zero Code Geass cosplay. But even that is way less entertaining than I'm making it sound. Am I Actually the Strongest gets 3 waste bins full of busted Amazon Fire tablets, Syscon self-help books, and curdled demon titty milk. Look, man, if I wanted to watch an anime hero lie around being a useless piece of shit, I'd just watch Level 1 Demon Lord and One Room Hero. And hey, so should you, because it's a pretty good show. Max wasn't always a piece of shit, mind you. He did save the whole dang world from a demon lord one time, but when that great ancient evil reincarnates 10 years later to check up on his old enemy, he ain't doing so hot. Turns out the kind of modern neoliberal society that arises in the absence of demonic invaders doesn't really have much use for an old-fashioned JRPG hero. Especially not one who doesn't know how to stay out of bar fights or keep it in his pants. Not that he's even wearing pants most of the time these days. Max only leaves his cramped little apartment to buy beer and porn. Unable to bear the thought of their beloved nemesis living in such a sorry state, the Demon Lord vows to help the hero shape up and get back on his feet. Ostensibly, so it'll be more satisfying when they finally knock him down again, but, really, it seems like more of a romantic thing. But whatever ulterior motives they may have, with their help and that of their swimsuit-clad secretary, Max does finally find the courage to overcome some of his past scandals, put himself out there, and get in a street brawl with a drunken demoness wearing nothing but brass knuckles and a bath towel. Then he tries to be a professional YouTuber. And of course, he's almost immediately banned for taking the Demon Lord down the popsicle reviewer to cam girl pipeline in half an hour flat. Oh, did I forget to mention that the non-binary little gremlin can transmogrify itself into a sexy schoolgirl at will? Because it can, and yeah, I was not joking about the romantic tension there. Level 1 Demon Lord and One Room Hero is a laugh riot fantasy comedy unlike anything else out there, though in a few respects it does almost feel like the second coming of Overlord at Work that fate denied us last year. I give it 4 dumpsters full of suspiciously sexy cosplay outfits and all the potions that you didn't use even in the fight with the final boss, which, as it turns out, are a lot more flammable than you'd think. You know, if I had a nickel for every isekai this season in which a victim of Japanese overwork culture gets cut down in his prime only to be rewarded with a romantic entanglement with a blue-haired bunny girl, I'd have 2 nickels, and you know the rest of this meme. The 2 anime that weirdly happened twice in are My Unique Skill Makes Me OP even at level 1 and The Great Cleric, though they really couldn't be more different in other respects. Unique Skills, more of a goofy, lighthearted, slice-of-life fantasy comedy where the blue bunny girl's mainly after Protag Kun's massive carrot, whereas Cleric's a more serious, dramatic, and politically charged tale whose bunny girl catches feelings for the hero on account of how gallantly not racist he is. Also, he's the only healer in the country who hasn't been lured in by the siren song of for-profit medicine. Which is pretty based, I guess, but I wish that message wasn't buried in a show that looks like shit, sounds even shittier, and is written like...
わあ、俺、本当に転生してきたんだな。なんかめっちゃ気になるところで終わっちゃったけど。
Also, only one of these anime has anything even close to interesting world building, and it's not the one that wants to get all serious with it. Cleric's exploration of its generic light novel RPG stat system begins and ends with, wow, it sure is easier to grind away for years at a tedious job when I can see my numbers gradually going up, whereas Unique Skill imagines what an economy might look like in a world where the only means of production for any basic resource is drops from dungeon mobs, with Protag Kun's aforementioned OP skill being an S-ranked drop rate that yields, for example, bigger, juicier carrots for them bunny girls to hop on, and also a gun, which is, you know, pretty useful in a medieval combat context, and combined with the bunny girl, it's kind of given we have Arifureta at home. Anyway, outside the bunny girls, the only thing these isekai really have in common is a time to stat screen in the sub 5-minute range, but that places them both firmly at the bottom of the isekai barrel. I give the not-so-great Cleric 1 Artist Alley dumpster full of Shia Arifureta posters and soggy tissues. Something something OP skill whatever gets 2. Also, the tissues are a little bit less soggy, so it might plausibly catch fire one day. Now, based on what I just said, you might be thinking that Reborn is a vending machine, Now I Wander the Labyrinth's sub 3-minute time to stat would make it even worse. But the thing about that is, it's a vending machine stat screen, not a Dragon Quest stat screen, which is totally different. because I said so. Look, pal, at this point in my life, I've gotten bored of more half-assed fantasy anime tropes than you even know exist. So when I tell you I have never seen a protag-kun fight quite like this before, I know from whence I speak. Boxo's ability to transform into any kind of vending machine that he used in his past life opens the door for a ton of incredibly fun and creative problem-solving opportunities, not to mention some educational ones. Like, most of us are aware of how cracked Japanese vending machines can be, like the ones that serve liquor or hot meals like karaage and curry. But did you know you can get flowers from a vending machine? Or oxygen? Or pornography? Wait, is that a Metal Gear Solid reference? Anyway, with some of the stuff Boxo's got on sale, I even feel like I'm learning new things about his character.
女性用の下着は間違えて購入したものだということを強調しておきたい。
Sure, Boxo. Reborn as a vending machine gets 4 roadside trash bins full of Mentos Diet Coke bottles ready to blow. Okay, but just hypothetically, what if the only 3 ways that you ever want to see a magic guy solve a monster problem is by beating it up because he's the strongest dude ever, fucking it, or all of the above? Has the anime industry just abandoned those of us who only want safe, samey garbage where a Dragon Quest hero type dude saves the world and gets all the bitches? You're joking, right? This is the anime industry we're talking about. Anyway, let me tell you about Classroom for Heroes, the I can't believe it's not isekai equivalent of calling a horror anime old house full of spooky stuff. It's so on the nose that at first I honestly thought this might be trying to like parody the genre. I mean, the tsundere character is only a tsundere because she's literally possessed by a demon. That seems like the punchline to a hilarious joke, but no, what this anime thinks a joke is when a cute girl gets addicted to donuts and then her actress does like an Eric Cartman voice until she figures out how to burn off all the calories by invoking her demonic powers. By the way, that's like the only episode of the show so far that's not just a backstory dump for one of the waifus. Honestly, I'm struggling to think of stuff to say about this one. The best rating I can give it is a waste bin full of plain cracker crumbs. The only thing saving this show from being the most forgettable harem in years is the designs of the background cast, who look right at home in like a medieval version of My Hero Academia or something. Really solid character design. Wish the protagonists were as interesting. So, now that you know the difference between trash and garbage, we can find... Oh, you still need some clarification? Well, luckily, the isekai menu this season does have plenty of suspiciously similar examples we can compare and contrast. Examples like a playthrough of a certain dude's VRMMO life, a title that ranks right up there with The Legend of the Legendary Heroes for descriptiveness and specificity. Ironically, this is one of the most unique VRMMO anime to come out lately, at least on paper, by sole virtue of the fact that its Kirito is like an adult with a full-time job and stuff, which means he can't just no-life his way to overpowered status because he's already no-lifing for an exploitative corporation. So for once, Protag-kun isn't totally overpowered. What? When did I say that? Don't put words in my mouth. I can see why you'd think it though. Because he's only gaming in his spare time outside his work hours, unlike, you know, everyone else in the entire world who plays video games, Protag-san doesn't want other players to have to rely on him too much. So, when he creates his character, he intentionally chooses the worst class and all the worst skills from the beta, so no one will want to party up. And he can enjoy some relaxing solo play with an intentionally underpowered build, because obviously that's what you would want to have for your first playthrough of a new game when you know you're not gonna have other players to support you. But then, in a shocking twist, if you've never seen any show like this before, it turns out that all those worst skills actually have secret super good synergies with each other that the beta players just never discovered, such as the incredibly obscure combo of stealth and archery. That's right, literally the most basic Skyrim cheese strat. Protag-kun invented it,
by accident. Wow, what a genius. He's also pretty much the only player in the whole game who can craft medicine, because in beta you could just buy potions from the NPCs, so, you know, why bother? And I guess all the MMO veterans in that beta just assumed the devs would never bother to fix a problem with their economy that renders an entire system they probably spent years developing functionally useless, because they are all f***ing shocked Pikachus when the NPC vendors start running out of stock and Protag-kun cleans up with these great flavored potions he's been testing in his vending machines, which he has because, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, he's also the only player in the entire game who's tried the cooking system since launch. Look, if you told me this anime was written by the same guy as this ad...
Hey guys, finished testing that game yet? I've got another one I need designed.
We just finished level 3 and need to tighten up the graphics a little bit.
Great.
I would not believe you. Obviously, the show's Japanese. But that's the only reason I wouldn't. A certain VRMMO dude gets 2 waste paper baskets full of Nexon game cards and a certain funny thing? Substance? F it. This anime's not trying. The other good VRMMO shows like Log Horizon and SAO Alternative Gun Gale also nail. This show also gets the behind the scenes shit. It's clear. When we're done here, you should definitely go check out his worst MMO ever videos. If you like my roasts, they will be right up your alley. Not this alley. This is my alley. I'm paying $1,200 a month for this place. We're in Vancouver. Butareba, the story of a man who turned into a pig, is a story about a man, specifically a who gets isekai'd by food poisoning himself with a pig's liver and ends up in the body of a pig. And thus he must do all the isekai stuff despite only being able to do pig stuff, plus like a little bit of human thinky stuff. Also DDR stuff. He's very good at DDR. 2 episodes in a row fill an entire minute of screen time with just him doing DDR inside his head, while various poorly animated villagers look on and react.
Perfect!
But the main thing he does is think extremely perverted thoughts about the beautiful slave girl who rescued him from the pig pen, which she can hear because every member of her enslaved race, the Yethma, have telepathic powers. So it's really a show about a 19-year-old guy constantly telling the 16-year-old girl he's constantly reminding himself and the audience is, in fact, 16, how nice and silky her thighs are. But that technically doesn't count as sexual harassment because he's not saying it out loud and she can't help hearing it. You know, the sort of isekai where they gotta spend several minutes figuring out exactly how to straddle and ride a pig without getting too, stimulated by the experience. It's also, in a shocking twist, one of the only types of isekai I've seen with a sexy slave waifu in it that actually bothers to, like, condemn chattel slavery as a concept unambiguously without fetishizing or apologizing for it in any way. Also, when a hotter guy shows up and starts making eyes at his crush, the pig's just like, yeah, that makes me jealous, but she can do what she wants. I don't own her. So don't judge a book by its cover, I guess? Or its other contents, for that matter. I give Butareba 3 toxic waste barrels full of surprisingly feminist softcore bestiality doujins. I also found myself quite pleasantly surprised with the Returner's Magic Should Be Special, which seems like just another half-assed Mahoka-like pseudo-Harry Potter clone about a guy in a magic school with mostly tournament arc-oriented curriculum whose magic power is the power to turn off other magic powers, and it mostly is one of those, albeit without Mahoka's iconic sister f***er elements, but it manages to take a seed of a sort of unique idea and develop it into something genuinely interesting with that framework. The returner part of the title refers to our protag, Desir Herman, who returns to his first day of magic school from the last day of an apocalyptic monster battle that killed all his classmates 3 years in the future, which of course he wants to stop by bringing all those classmates up to his own OP level. But
That's easier said than done when the nobility-run school refuses to give its commoner students a proper education. So the story isn't really about killing all the monsters to save the world, it's about fixing the systemic oppression that stands in the way of true monster-killing progress. Based, honestly. And I mean, the genius solution he comes up with to that systemic problem is just to prove the bigots wrong by winning a tournament arc. Not exactly galaxy-brained politics there, but the trio he puts together to do that, consisting of him, a tsundere with a secret crush on him, and a little fencing twink with also a secret crush on him, whom the tsundere happens to think is platonically adorable, thus creating this very fun, not quite love triangle dynamic, actually reflects that theme really well by representing the outsider perspectives of a commoner, a nouveau riche noble, and a nobleman's secret bastard, respectively. So, as they interact with each other and the other students, their backstories naturally fuel the world building in really interesting ways.
名前は
デジール・アルマンです。
なんだよ、平民じゃん。
There is some surprisingly solid fantasy writing buried in all this magic school anime bullshit. And the same can be said for the Demon Lord at Excalibur Academy. Although in that show's case, the bullshit goes at least as deep as the world building, if not deeper, which is impressive in a way, considering how much time this show devotes to fleshing out both the prehistory history of its double reincarnated human hero turned demon lord turned 12-year-old boy, and the 1,000-year modern history of the monster-besieged Magitech-based civilization that's seemingly long since forgotten both of his legends. No bones about it, that is some intriguing and genuinely original world building, and the show has a lot of it. So imagine how high the bullshit pile has to be to match that. There are a lot of layers to this anime's setting and characters, but to get to them, you gotta go through even more layers of the protag being an adult man in a 12-year-old's body and flirting with, like, every kind of woman who should not be flirting with that kind of body, especially a teenage girl who happens to technically also be a corpse, a sexy corpse, that cannot resist the commands of her necromantic master, who, let me remind you, is a 12-year-old boy. So, you know, in case any isekai fans in the house were worried that the guard dog girl trash was gonna outdo your favorite genre, worry not! Your crown is safe for another season.
ダメじゃないレオくん。それ石鹸でしょ？シャンプー使わないと。どうしたのレオくん？もしかして裸見られて恥ずかしいの？男の子なのに。
A Returner's Magic gets 2 trash bins full of slightly smoldering printouts of surprisingly political Harry Potter slashfic, and the Demon Lord with the magic sword gets 4 flaming dumpsters full of just the tags for all the other Harry Potter fanfics. If I had a nickel for every anime season that gave me a reason to deploy this meme in 2023, I'd have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but I guess it's not that weird it happened twice. It's a very popular meme, and I love Phineas and Ferb. Anyway, Ragna Crimson is also about a super OP guy from the future where all his friends are dead, sending his brain back in time to unmurder all of them. Though in contrast to the more political approach of its contemporary, Ragna Crimson goes about this by being as absurdly edgy as it possibly can at every conceivable moment. Starring, quite possibly, the edgiest guy ever named Ragna, and the only other contender for that crown is literally named Ragna the Blood Edge. So here's the sitch. It's ye old medieval days, except there's cars and guns sometimes, and life is mostly chilled for people, except also there's dragons sometimes, which you can't kill with the guns unless you spend a lot of money on silver bullets. Or maybe you catch them out in sunlight because it's one of them Demon Slayer type situations where they just took some JoJo vampires and called them something else. Anyway, that's why there's still dudes running around with silver swords hunting dragons, even though guns. Also, some not dudes do it, including this one, Leo, who's like 12 and also the best at it, a true dragon murder genius, which is why this wimpy, much older than 12 dude named Ragna is traveling with her, cooking for her, cuddling her in bed, bathing her, and so on. Wow. All this modern technology, and they still haven't invented child protective services. Not that it would have helped much in protecting that child or anyone else when the 10 mighty greater dragons decide to use all their JoJo vampire powers to wipe out all of humanity. Ragna survives that, though, after fusing with his own silver sword and gaining the power to fight those greater dragons head on. Then, after all of them are dead, he takes that power back in time to save Leo and all the other humans, presumably, with the help of this mad scientist edgelord dragon named Crimson, who wants to kill all the other dragons because reasons. And you know what they say, double the edgelords, double the edge. If you want to watch some very cool, beautifully animated magic turn vast swaths of people into equally beautiful bursts of blood and giblets, also sometimes dragons get turned into that, this anime's all that in a bag of extremely pointy potato chip shards.
今すぐぐちゃぐちゃに噛みつぶしてやるわ
爆発しろ
And if you want to add a third edgelord to the mix for even more fun, Kingdoms of Ruin provides more of the same with its story of a world where humanity and witches once lived in harmony until the humans invented science and decided to genocide all the witches with it because they were holding humanity back by helping us with magic too much. Kinda just seems like the humans felt like it. Anyway, this prompts our OP protag Adonis, the lone human apprentice of the strongest witch ever, Chloe, who is like a mother to him, and also a father, a brother, a sister, and you can fill in the blank on that last one, to embark on a mad quest for revenge when he finally breaks out of the magic Hannibal Lecter box the human emperor stuck him in after shooting her in the face right in front of him when she was about to say, "I love you," because of course she was about to say that. It wouldn't be the edgiest thing possible if she wasn't. Though when he does get out, taking on all the humans proves much easier than expected, because it turns out they can't use their anti-magic tech anymore because it has a side effect of giving people eye-bleeding super cancer, like instantaneously the second you're exposed to even just a little bit of the anti-magic radiation, which nobody noticed for a decade somehow, even though they were using that constantly. And like, yeah, the world building and whole story situation here really is not great. Some might even call it garbage. Personally, my eyes completely glaze over every time this show takes even a minute-long break for exposition dumps or character development, but luckily, the many scenes where half the characters we just met barely get half a sentence out before getting smushed or sukuna'd by some magic bullshit or science bullshit, as the case may be, more than make up for the too many scenes of those same characters talking way, way too f***ing much. If anything, the boring bits just make the carnage more cathartic. If you're just looking to turn your brain off for a bit and unwind with some edgy fun, both of these anime are perfect for it. But unfortunately, if you were hoping to quadruple down on that edginess, I'm sorry to report that Fall's last option is a bit lacking in comparison, to put it mildly. Not to judge a book by its cover, but when I saw this anime's source material on a manga shelf this summer, sporting the bright red title Berserk of Gluttony, I judged that shit super hard, and this anime has only validated that knee-jerk reaction. Sure, it's not quite the blatant knockoff that 7C's branding makes it out to be. Ragna Crimson's got way more We Have Berserk at Home vibes if you actually watch either of these anime, but that's just because gluttony-type Berserk is far too busy knocking off other way shittier fantasy anime to borrow much of anything from its peak namesake. Set in one of those anime fantasy worlds that works like a JRPG, kinda just because. The show's resident Kirito, Fate Graphite, yes, that is his real name, is the type of Kirito who gets picked on because everyone thinks his unique JRPG skill is super duper underpowered, when actually it's super duper overpowered. Bet you didn't see that coming. More specifically, it lets him circumvent the world's traditional level up mechanics in favor of stealing the stats of any monster or person he kills. But he's got to keep all that secret, you see, because those traditional level up mechanics are religious orthodoxy in this world, and if his sinful skill ever gets out, the church will send its holy knights to murderize him. Though, of course, if and when that happens, he'll be the only one doing any murderizing on account of how OP he is, but that's probably good for society at large, in addition to him, because all the Holy Knights seem to be giant bullies. I mean, villains. This show definitely isn't a thinly veiled metaphor for getting back at all the popular kids in high school. It's a super serial, gritty, dark fantasy about a world where the so-called nobility do very realistic and historical bad things, like buying child orphans on the black market to fulfill their sick fantasies of, doing William Tell impressions. Corrupt holy knights, outcast heroes themed around the 7 deadly sins, the boring, entirely stat-based magic system, completely dogshit writing on every level. Why do I feel like I've heard this all before in some kind of repressed memory? Nah, I must be imagining things. Anyway, I think you get the point by this point. Ragna Crimson gets 4 trash cans full of blood and razor blades that are also on fire somehow. And also that fire is black, like my soul. Then I'm gonna give Kingdoms of Ruin 3 of that same sort of trash bin. And then Berserk of Gluttony gets, let's say, 2 trash cans full of tomato juice and safety scissors.
The Iceblade Sorcerer Shall Rule the World is the latest entry in the guy at a magic school who isn't very good at magic, but then secretly it turns out he has the best magic and or the best muscles genre, which you might not have even known is a genre, but boy, is it ever a genre? And Iceblade Sorcerer specifically takes after that genre's progenitor, the irregular at Magic High School, aka Mahoka, by being about an ex-child soldier with the magic power to turn off other people's magic powers. Though it does also subvert that genre somewhat by not also being about how bad that guy's sister wants to him every day all the time. That said, all of his unrelated classmates still do, regardless of gender, so it could stand to be a lot subvertier. In fact, it's about as generic and dumb as fantasy anime come, but there is a certain charm in that. From the manly roommate who's constantly Myron Protag-kun's shredded abs in a purely heterosexual way, to the shy tsundere whose twin tails seem to have a mind of their own, to the aggressive tsundere who's super tough but then also scared of spiders, the cast here is hardly original, but it is undeniably fun to watch them interact, with the most fun one of all being Protag-kun himself, Ray White, who comes off as stereotypically surly and mysterious at first, but quickly reveals himself to be a goofy, go-getting sort of guy who absolutely commits to any and all bits, from playing a hard-ass drill sergeant to infiltrating a rival school in women's clothing. Even when he's dealing with the obligatory rich kid bully who hates him for being both poor and better than him, Ray doesn't shove that guy's inadequacy in his face or kick him when he's down. Rather, he offers a helping hand and encourages him to be better, which he does in a very slight contrast to your typical Act 1 of a light novel We Have Malfoy at Home. Between that redemption arc, the cross-dressing, and Ray's club full of intimidating yet encouraging muscle friends, you can clearly feel some influence from Mob Psycho 100 here, as plain to see as the influence of my Annie-tube buddy Glass Reflection on this magic school's uniforms. But the best part of that laid-back atmosphere that Ray and his his friends help create is how it in turn creates some absolutely hilarious tonal whiplash whenever the show jumps from goofy slice-of-life magic stuff to the blood-soaked war-is-hell edginess of his backstory, with Rei's own magic being so edgy that his face starts bleeding whenever he uses it, which he typically has to do in battle against agents of a secret society of evil wizards who want to become more powerful by murdering small children and draining the magic juice out of their skulls so they can then inject it into the magic center of their own brains. A secret society known only as
Eugenics.
And you call your evil organization eugenics, despite the fact that you are clearly practicing phrenology.
You know, one thing I should... Excuse me for 1 second.
With its corny writing and sub-High Guardian Spice quality animation, I'd be lying if I called any part of this anime good, but I'd also be lying if I said I didn't have a ton of fun watching it be as bad as it is. The Iceblade Sorcerer Shall Rule the World gets 3 trash cans full of the worst Harry Potter fanfiction you can imagine, burning cozily in a well-sheltered underpass. Chez Garbage regulars have told us they're getting a bit tired of the same old isekai trash each season, so our chefs in back have been working on some exciting new fusion cuisine to freshen things up. On first taste, the new gate bears the distinct flavor of store-brand Sword Art Online. But once you really sink your teeth into it, it reveals the rich, new, slightly different flavor of Walmart Overlord. Yes, for the first time ever, trapped in a VRMMO anime and isekai collide to create something totally new and different. Log Horizon doesn't count. That was a regular MMO that they got both trapped in and isekai'd into at the same time. Completely different.
You are technically correct. The best kind of correct.
So basically, this guy, who's definitely not Kirito, note the red stripes on his trench coat, completely different guy. Please don't sue us, Reki Kawahara. He goes off to solo the big bad of this VRMMO everyone's been trapped in for some amount of time, it's not clear, and he wins. So the logout button comes back, and then he just sort of sits around for a bit, like to make sure everyone else logs out, I guess. But then, before he can log out, a magic door opens, and now it's 500 years later, and the game is real life. Also, in the 500 years since all the best adventurers got raptured from the perspective of the now sentient NPCs, Magic Society has regressed substantially. So like, any old Joe from the VRMMO would have been the most powerful guy ever here, let alone the Kirito. And this guy is the Kirito. I mean, he's totally not Kirito. So, yeah, long story short, his old house from the game has become the most legendary magic shop in the whole wide world, to the point that a letter of introduction from his old NPC assistant's NPC assistant is basically equivalent to a Hunter x Hunter license. And he uses one of those to go smurf as a regular adventurer, killing level 600 monsters by sneezing at them, even when he has his power limiter on, and every girl he meets everywhere, plus a lot of the guys, tries to jump on his dick all the time, including the Adventurers Guild clerk ladies, who are twins.
ちょっと報告しておきたいことがあるんですけど。
承ります。はい、私が承ります。シリカ？何？
Which might seem like every isekai you've ever seen, but remember, they knocked off the last 10 minutes of Aincrad in the first 10 minutes of this thing, so it's different. I give it 3 slightly smoldering bins full of SAO and Overlord merch with the serial numbers filed off. The banished former hero lives as he pleases, takes 2 of the trashiest non-portal fantasy concepts out there, a reincarnated hero coming back to around in a world without demon kings, and an adventurer dude who gets written off for being underpowered when he's secretly super overpowered, and inexpertly blends them together with some of the most dog water animation you have ever seen to create something uniquely and exquisitely unwatchable. Though at least the ED's a bop. Set in a world where everyone gets a magical gift from God that either does stuff to kill monsters or helps them with their job, our hero, Alan, is cast out as a failure by his noble father at the tender age of 18 because he didn't get any gift when he was baptized. But what his dad failed to realize is Alan was only pretending to be a fail son so he could be banished to the countryside and use all the hero powers that he still has from his past life, which he remembers, to go around saving princesses and killing the ugliest monster designs you have ever laid eyes on. So all the hero stuff his dad wanted him to do, basically, but, you know, on his own terms without his dad's approval or knowledge, so he's still disappointed in him. Real teen rebel, this one. So yeah, the plot's about on par with that animation, and in case you were thinking the dialogue might still carry this one. Yeah. No. The scheme in question was actually cooked up by Alan's asshole dad, Craig, with the help of his equally asshole brother, Brett, and also this demon dude who looks like the killer from every Detective Conan episode, but with horns, because literally any effort from the designers would be way too much for this script. The demons want humanity to give up all their gifts, you see, so they'll be easier to conquer, and Alan's bad dad decides to go along with that to prove his deeply held belief that levels are better than gifts, actually, because gifts let God control your destiny, but leveling up in a JRPG lets you kill God, maybe.
レベルを上げるというのは魂の怒りを上げること、つまりより上位の存在、神に近づける。
You heard that right. The villain's ideology is rooted in the show's RPG mechanics. That's how little they're trying here. Well, okay, that's not entirely fair. The real reason Craig hates gifts and wants to kill God with his high level is because he had the gift to predict the future, and with it, he foresaw that his wife would die because of her gift that made her destined to be an anime protagonist's dead mom. But then, when Alan was born, he pretended that he wasn't an anime protagonist so he could relax and take it easy in this life, meaning that Craig thought his wife died for nothing, which drove him to evil. And then his son reveals to him that he was a protagonist all along by murdering him. You know, I'm starting to feel like Alan maybe deserved a bit or all of that abuse. Kid's a real sack of shit, you feel me? But hey, so's the whole show. In fact, I give it 4 huge flamin' burlap sacks absolutely stuffed with it. When you hear a title like Chillin' in Another World with my level 2 cheat powers, you instantly get a pretty good idea of what you're getting into. Guy gets isekai'd and he's really OP, so everything goes super easy for him and all the ladies want his dick. Been there, done that, got so many t-shirts I'm running out of closet space. In this case though, there's a bit more to it than meets the eye. For starters, while our hero, Fleo, does get summoned to a fantastical other world, the world he starts in isn't Earth. He's just a regular old merchant from a slightly different fantasy world, notable mainly for treating his world's underclass of beastman slaves with more respect than your average human. When he arrives in the other world, he's delighted to discover that slavery isn't really a thing there. Though on the flip side, he was explicitly summoned as a conscript in a big ugly race war between man and demon, so that's not great. Lucky for him, his meager stats aren't high enough to be of much use to the human king, especially compared to the other hero they summoned, who starts in the low 900s, so he gets shipped off to a parcel of land deep in the countryside where he can't embarrass the royalty with evidence of their magic up. I mean, he's not that lucky. The king did bait his starting gear with a monster lure in hopes he'd just disappear quietly. But after stabbing the first group of slimes that jumped him, he hits level 2, at which point his stats become literally infinite. So it all works out in the most conveniently contrived way possible. Shortly thereafter, he meets his obligatory harem of fantasy hotties, but also a feisty dog demon girl who refuses to let them become a harem because she's his wife, damn it, and a damn fine wife at that. Like any season that didn't have Holo in it, top tier best girl contender. And then they all just sort of hang around their cozy little homestead, farming, fighting psycho bears, and occasionally entertaining the Demon King when he stops by to hit on one of the not-a-harem girls, all while trying their best to not get involved in that whole race war thing. With occasional cutaways to show the king and other hero being jackasses, while the nice princess tries to fix them. Basically, wherever shield hero zigs, this show zags, and even if it's not particularly fun to look at most of the time, yeesh, that animation, it is frequently fun to watch as a result, and pretty darn funny to boot. I give Chillin' in Another World 3 big breaths of fresh air, sealed inside of airtight trash bags and held aloft by a small steady flame in a clever trash dirigible contraption. There's no easy way to stand out in the overcrowded modern fantasy anime landscape, but even if you don't have good animation or writing, a catchy hit theme song can take you a long way. And Remonster was clearly made by people who've heard that advice. I didn't say they understood it, and that's kind of a running theme with this particular piece of isekai crap. Like, on paper, our formerly human hero, Gabro, understands that consent is good and standard anime goblin mating practices are bad, so he outlaws those as soon as he takes over the tribe with his superior earth brain. But then, every single kidnapped woman he saves from getting goblin slayered just sort of Stockholm syndromes her way into his bed one episode later anyway, so he more or less just good cop, bad copped his way into doing the exact same thing. Then later, he's just straight up a bad cop with some prisoners of war. Very not cool, though at least most of that stuff does happen off screen, which is definitely a tasteful directing choice and not just an excuse to cut even more corners on the incredibly Studio Dean core animation.
死なないギリギリのラインで一番きついお仕置きをしたホブ犬が息絶えたのは朝になった頃だった。
Still, I do kind of wish I'd been able to watch more than 2 episodes of this thing before throwing it in the spring bargain bin, and not just because it gets so casually disgusting. Early on, I thought the series was just using the daily diary entry format as a way to gloss over the early development of its characters and get to the real action and world building. But then it just keeps doing it, so each episode is just a series of random numbered title cards preceding equally random events, half of which are these out-of-nowhere, barely comprehensible fight scenes that constantly lean into video game logic over common sense, like, we gotta break the skeleton's bones, guys! Quick, throw away your 3-pound steel rods and punch him! And then the other half are just protag or a harem girl saying, hey, look, I turned into a different kind of monster or got a new skill or whatever, and then it's tomorrow or a week from now, which I suppose would have been a serviceable enough way to tell this story if the concept of following a monster man as he eats stuff and levels up and steals its skills was in any way novel. But even if Remonster's web novel did technically come first, Reincarnated as a Slime beat it to the anime market by like over half a decade, and it does basically the same thing but with an actual plot structure, and also having a slime protagonist steal skills by eating guys makes way more sense than a goblin doing it just because he happened to be a psychic cannibal in his past life. So yeah, just watch that instead. Also, the title gimmick is getting really stupid really fast, and this joke probably won't make much sense when I'm reading it out loud, but fuck it, that's the level of effort this anime puts in. I give Remonster 1 dumpster full of rotting monster parts and extremely imbalanced D&D character sheets, which is on fire, but off screen because we ran out of money. Yes, it's finally time to tuck into the legendary trash that's finally back after so many seasons away. What? No, not the f***ing Harry Potter incest thing. Better, but still no. Obviously, I'm talking about Konosuba Season 3. The trashy isekai comedy about trash human beings and one trash goddess perpetually failing upwards in a world that's far too good for them. The new season picks up where the movie left off, with Kazuma trying to overcome the trauma of being molested by various monster ladies and dying, he got better, by running off to a convent to become a monk. Though along the way, the party encounters a new kind of plant-based monster that preys on empathy and trust. Sort of like Friren's demons, which really sucks for her, because Kazuma has very little of either. After digging up the presumably less paranoid isekai hero she met before them, the party also finds the infinite gold-generating treasure that guy reincarnated with. So Kazuma says screw the convent and heads back to town to spend some of that cash, but of course it immediately gets stolen, so they're back to their old hijinks. Though little do they realize that was actually the first step on a larger quest to recover a whole bunch of isekai cheat items that Aqua sort of lost track of because she really sucked at her old job. Also, before they can really get back to their typical adventuring shenanigans, they've got to get through regaling the crown princess with tales of those shenanigans without getting executed for a breach of courtly etiquette, which, knowing this crew, is gonna be a greater challenge than any of the demon generals they've taken down so far. And if you don't know this crew, man, I cannot recommend highly enough that you correct that at your earliest convenience. Because Konosuba's last 2 seasons are some of the funniest, most charmingly animated TV out there, and this new one more than lives up to that legacy. It's so rare to see anime continue after this long away, let alone do so without falling off at all. But Konosuba remains a prime example of what 5 golden dumpster tier trash looks like. Actually, screw that. This show deserves its own properly godly trash rating. Aqua out of 10. With that said, I hope you saved room for a second, even trashier dessert. Because no matter how useless and horrible the waifus of Konosuba might be, at least none of them are predators, just Kazuma.
その前に俺が何みたいだって？昔のお兄様みたいだと。もう一度言ってください。お願いします。お兄様みたいです。もう一度。
Wait, sorry, my mistake. I wrote this segue before watching Season 3, Episode 5.
あれ？なんだかお姉さんのアイリスを見る目が。そっちか！真面目でお堅いやつだと思ったのに、そっちだったか！
Underestimated you, Konosuba. But Claire the Castle Guard is only a minor attracted character, whereas Silpha, the head maid in I Was Reincarnated as the 7th Prince so I can take my time perfecting my magical ability, gets the most screen time out of anyone in that show, besides, of course, the very young titular protag-kun that she and all the other maids, the king really should have screened better, are constantly drooling over and fantasizing about. Don't worry too much though. Mentally speaking, Prince Lloyd's like 30, having previously died as a magic-obsessed commoner and gotten his wish to be reborn in a noble family with innate magical talent, so one could argue he's the real creep here, were he not actually a very gentlemanly little fella who politely refused to even breastfeed. And anyway, he's way too horny for magic to even think about the ethics of this whole situation, which is the right mindset to be in if you want to enjoy this anime. Which I honestly think quite a lot of you will, despite how I chose to segue into it, because once you look past that admittedly quite sticky sticking point, you're gonna see a whole lot of this.
国戦法だ。勉強になったか。何？
especially once Lloyd makes Grimoire, the ancient demon sealed within his castle's forbidden magic library that you saw him fighting just there, his fluffy little bitch, and starts using his demonic powers to find even crazier magic system exploits, which he then tries out on even more deserving bad guys, treating ancient sociopathic liches and sex-pesty demons like they're ants, and he's got a magic magnifying glass. It's basically One Punch Man for guys who'd rather read lots of books than do lots of push-ups, and also guys who've always wanted to see a Chinese dress with built-in booty shorts, which is worn by a girl with a crush on a magically aged-up version of the prince, just by the by. So if you can't stop thinking about that thing I told you not to think about, there's your default best girl. No, you know what? Default feels really reductive. Tao is a genuinely great character. All of these characters are a ton of fun, especially Grim, that fuzzy little tsundere, and even the ones you'd probably catch doing a ukulele apology video in a different universe. Plus, the magic system would be genuinely interesting, even if Lloyd wasn't taking it to hilarious extremes, and the extremes the show goes to are frequently straight up hilarious. I overlooked this anime on this season's ones to watch precisely because all the everything turned me away from it, and I just didn't see much more here than a shameless power fantasy. But having watched a lot more of it, it absolutely is that, but it's the joyous, free kind of shameless that I built this restaurant to celebrate. I give it 5 magic school dumpsters full of weirdly tight overall shorts and grimoires crackling with arcane fire. Speaking of bite-sized stuff, every item on tonight's menu comes with an optional side of plus-size elf. An anime about a world that's got portals to other worlds and sometimes elf girls, plus other types of girl come through those, and then they get addicted to processed foods because they don't have those in fantasy worlds. But then the portal uses a weight sensor, so they gotta like work that off to go back, or to use magic without their magic thong that they need to use magic snapping on their badonkadonks, which is obviously a problem because you can't do magic without your magic thong. Also, there's this massage therapy nutritionist type guy who helps them lose that weight and sees them naked a lot because their clothes are made of tissue paper. It's one of those anime. But, you know, for chubby chasers, who frankly are one of the most underserved kinds of pervert in the entire anime community, so more power to them, I say. Aside from some surprisingly good health and wellness tips every episode, that really is all this anime has to offer. It's basically empty calories, but that's exactly what you want from a basket of French fries at the end of the day. Sure, maybe those fries are a wee bit misshapen sometimes due to the guys making them barely having time to sleep between all-day shifts at their sub-minimum wage job, but they get the job done, and you don't gotta buy the Blu-ray to see their nipples. By the way, in those last few sentences, French fries was a clever euphemism for big fat anime titties. I give plus-size elf 3 novelty trash can shaped bread baskets. I feel like that's an important distinction to make because the next item on our menu, the Osan Newbie Adventurer, is explicitly made for sad men in their 30s and 40s who will have no idea what those cups even are. Though their girlfriends might. Finally, a fantasy anime for Leonardo DiCaprio. A fantasy anime that dares to say, hey, remember all them hot-blooded, big-muscled fighting anime you grew up on? We got their theme song guy, and he's twice as old as you are. Boy, you can really hear the 7 years since Kushida did the Dragon Ball Super theme. You know, I feel kind of mean ragging on all the old man stuff. Feels like bullying your grandpa for going to see the Rolling Stones in concert.
I love the young people.
but it really is the show's only distinguishing features. Story-wise, it's about an unfulfilled guy who quits his job to go work out a bunch, then comes back strong enough to kill monsters in a single punch, although his ranking at the local monster punching trade union does not reflect that skill, and so people are constantly underestimating him, especially rival monster punchers who think they're hot shit. Do I need to spell this out for you? It's Fantasy One Punch Man with an age gap. You think that's a gotcha? Bud, the sassy lost child is older than Saitama. And look, normally, I'd be 100% on board for some Fantasy One Punch Man nonsense. I have been known to enjoy such things quite a lot, but the real trouble for Osan Adventurer is it's airing alongside I Parry Everything, which is pretty much the exact same show, only better in every conceivable way. Like animation, obviously, but also writing. Instead of a simpering waifu sidekick, I Parry Everything pairs its protag Norup with a proper gender-flipped Genos, this literal princess who is so convinced of his absolute combat genius that she takes everything this sheltered backwoods idiot who's literally never seen a monster before in his life says at face value, in turn perpetuating his misconceptions that that's what a regular goblin looks like, this is just a cow, and he's still just a regular, unremarkable dude who's kind of in a little over his head. All of which makes the joke that he doesn't know how insanely overpowered he is infinitely funnier than how Osan tells it. In Osan, Rick'll just pulled the most insane feat of strength and speed that anyone has ever seen to absolutely stunt on the hands-down strongest other guy in the room, and then he's just like, wow, my opponent sure was going easy on me based on absolutely nothing, despite the fact that he's got this sexy 20-year-old dark elf maid chick who happens to be one of the strongest people on the planet, by the way, clinging to his arm and telling him what a tough guy hunk he is constantly. And his old job for the last decade was filing paperwork for the official Adventurer Ranking Bureau. I simply do not buy this joke's premise at all for 1 second, and I'm so glad they drop it after the first arc, because frankly, it felt like the show was gaslighting me. It does get a bit better after we meet the rest of the crazy characters in Rick's party and get into their lifelong quest to collect a bunch of MacGuffins and beat up a really big monster. But compared to the geopolitical shenanigans that I Parry Everything's gotten up to by its second arc, it's still no contest which one's worth watching. Though it's also no contest which one's trashier. I Parry Everything barely even does fan service, and there's not a stat screen in sight, so the best I can give it is one golden firework dumpster. Osan Adventurer, on the other hand, gets 3 record store bargain bins full of dad rock albums. But even Osan's preferable to the other kind of underestimated, overpowered adventurer story. You know, edgelord Garbo, like Berserk of Gluttony, about kids who get bullied super hard for not having good abilities, but then they discover their abilities are good actually, and use them to make them pay. Make them all pay. Which we got an Isekai one of this season in Failure Frame. I became the strongest and annihilated everything with low-level spells, and it might just be the edgiest isekai trash ever made. I know that's a bold statement, what with all the slave-owning shield heroes and hentai goblins in this genre, but this thing is basically a more trenchcoat mafia-pilled take on Arifureta, and that show's edgy protagonist literally pulls magic guns out of his trenchcoat. In contrast to Shield Hero's relatively cheerful first episode, which devotes only 25% of its runtime to Princess Bitch unsolved betrayal, Failure Frame's pilot is literally just a 20-minute long itemized list of Toka Mimori's 13 reasons. We cut from a flashback of his abusive stepdad abusing him to his present-day classmates bullying him for standing up for this girl who didn't want to be hit on a bus ride. Then, after they all get isekai'd, all his bullies and the popular kids get all the high-rank gotcha skills while he's stuck at E-rank with abilities so trashy that the slutty gotcha goddess decides to just throw him in the literal magic garbage.
その転移魔法陣で最低ランクの勇者をとある遺跡へ転送します。名は通称廃棄遺跡。
But that gets announced like halfway through the episode, so at least there's a little bit of time to balance all that crap out with some action, right? Wrong. Because before he can go to that death dungeon to do cool anime stuff, all his most popular and OP classmates have got to line up one by one to tell him that they hate him, and his pleading for his life is totally just killing the vibe, and he should really just read the room and die already. Also, this unpopular little emo bitch who he used to be nice to stabs him in the back the second he gets a drop of S-rank social capital. And while that one girl he'd tell not to come to school tomorrow does, of course, stand up for him, she just gets knocked the f*** out for her trouble. And what's our reward for sitting through that episode-long Born to Die World is a f*** manifesto? Some actually kind of cool CGI monster designs, if I'm being honest. Grotesque, gangly proportions, generally very creative interpretations of classic concepts like the Minotaur. Though let me tell you right now, those qualities are more than offset by the CGI models of the human characters, which they use a lot. And those monster designs are completely wasted by the show's high concept anyway, since the low-level spells that his E-rank skill inflicts are, in fact, guaranteed hit status effects, which is insane because all of those have really low hit percentages otherwise, meaning he can instantly poison and paralyze anything just by pointing at it. It's a Death Note with extra steps, and the extra steps are torture. So instead of fight scenes, we have a series of big air quotes dramatic confrontations in which the hero instantly wins in one move, maybe two if he's feeling spicy and puts on an act to lower their guard first, then spends the next 5 to 10 minutes gloating while his foe agonizingly and slowly dies with no hope of escape while turning just the stupidest shade of Barney purple.
お前らみたいなのを駆除すると不思議と気分がいい。これが意外と悪くない。
Don't you worry though, Failure Frame makes sure you know they all super duper deserve it, and not just his classmates. By an astounding coincidence, 11 out of the 12 fantasy thugs he's murdered so far across 4 separate episodes were all distracted by debates about how much they should his elf waifu before they murder her, right before he murdered them. And the 12th one was about to do it. This clown show makes SAO's rogues gallery look rich, complex, and varied. Of course, at the end of the day, they're all just f***ing blood bags for him to pop on the way to murdering his first actual classmate, right? We shouldn't expect guys with screen time measured in minutes or seconds to be much more complex than the thugs he fooled by begging for his life, or the rival type dude he promised he'd get stronger and fight later, but then he just stabbed him in the back the second he turned it. But outside of those archetypes, they could at least be different kinds of scumbag, right? Like, surely there's gotta be at least one cannibal out there, or a real estate speculator? I mean, P Vibes are also the B-rank classmate he's definitely gonna murder first's whole thing, and this other lesbian classmate who makes one of the nice girl classmates murder monsters even though she really doesn't want to is also molesting her on the side. Hell, even the king who put a bounty on the elf waifu's head only did it because if I can't have her, no one will. It is literally rapists all the way down. Like the author wanted tips from Dan Harmon's Story Circle, but accidentally found that one deeply unfunny pyramid head meme instead. At least the gotcha goddess is kinda entertaining. No, scratch that. She is profoundly entertaining. Like if Aqua was the villain of Konosuba on purpose instead of by accident.
要するにあなたのスキルは外れ枠に当たるスキルなのです。しかも E 級だからだと思いますが、 ステータスが低すぎです。レベルが上がっても数値の伸びは期待できないでしょう。もういいですか?
But after the intro's done, she barely gets a couple minutes of B-plot an episode to transparently gaslight, gatekeep, and girl boss the f*** out of the entire class, which is some sumptuously campy villain nonsense, don't get me wrong. There's just so little of it next to this massive heap of samey dog shit. I give Failure Frame 5 trash cans full of blood and razors. Why Does Nobody Remember Me in This World is basically that most classic of Christmas movies, It's a Wonderful Life, only this timeline doesn't hinge on the protagonist's existence, barring any extremely obvious plot twists. Instead, there was this big war 30 years ago, see, where every race but one was ethnically cleansed from the entire planet in a mass holocaust where literally all of them were shoved into mass graves. And that's the good timeline. In the bad one, the genocide didn't work out, and now the humans who, to be clear, 100% would have done it, are living underground in fancy sci-fi bunkers that provide a reasonable, if uncomfortable, facsimile of surface life. Not dead, to be clear. I mean, some of them are off-screen, presumably, but not all of them, which, again, is canonically what these people would have done to every other race given the opportunity, and then they have a yearly anniversary celebration for it. But you know, they look like us, and the other ones have like horns and fur, so we're supposed to feel bad for the humans that they didn't get to do the genocide anymore, and want the protagonist to bring things back to how they were? Look, even without the moral considerations, I'd keep the timeline as is just to make sure I never have to see this animation again. No! Childhood friendship, not the liquefy filter! To be fair, the plot is shaping up to be a bit more complex than I'm letting on. The Prophet Sid, humanity's legendary hero from the good timeline, who nobody knows what he looked like in the old timeline because they never took his photo, and somehow Protag-kun has his magic sword now. I wonder if that's going to be a plot point later. Anyway, Sid may have slightly overstated the finality of his solution vis-a-vis the other races. Seems like he and some of their other heroes were secretly working together to stop whatever robot snake lady timeline f***ery is happening now. So it may have actually been some sort of 8D chess fake genocide gambit or something. I don't know. I have not read ahead in the light novels, and I'm not going to. But that doesn't change the fact that Protag-kun thinks he did it and looks up to him for doing it, and his entire motivation is, God damn, bro, things were so much better back when we won the race war. Doesn't even seem particularly driven to unliquefy filter his childhood friend anymore, since he's got this new angel main squeeze who somehow manages to look more generic than the literal parody of a generic angel waifu from 2.5D Seduction.
Please set me free from these chains.
So generic, I kind of want to give the show the benefit of the doubt on all that other stuff. I mean, Kei Suzane does come out with a new fantasy light novel series on average every 2 years. That is not a lot of time to think about world building. It is entirely possible he was just mindlessly mashing together fantasy tropes and put literally zero thought into the ethical implications of a global race war outside that context. Likely, even, given how the last anime with his name on it turned out. So I'm hedging my edge bets and giving this one 2 trash cans full of tomato sauce and safety scissors. I don't want to leave you hanging on all that edge I promised, though, so let's see if we can find it elsewhere, like in this show with a scary skeleton man on the cover. That's gotta be edgy, right? The strongest magician in the Demon King's army is a human is about that guy from the title I just read, who, yes, I'm sorry to say, is CGI like 90% of the time, and yes, it always looks at least that bad from every angle. And there's so many other 3D models, and none of them are better. But in Ike's defense, he's gotta keep that horribly rendered mask on, so nobody figures out that he's not a demon, at least not until he finishes his quest to build a world where everyone can get along. A goal he starts toward by taking over a human city with his big demon army, then putting the demons in the city next to the people whose home they just sacked and partially destroyed, and saying, hey, get along. And then they do. It just works. The Strongest Magician sometimes threatens to become a kinda genuinely interesting anime about fantasy politics and civic planning and shit, but then it just keeps shoving all that to the background, while in the foreground, the annoying ditzy maid and the horny Gyaru succubus chase each other around the dinner table yelling, he's mine! No, he's mine! Back and forth, while the fat pig dude who only ever opens his mouth to glaze up the protag is like, Aiku-sama, your dick is so big! How are you so handsome and such a genius at the same time? Like they're in the local theater putting on a production of Overlord. And then, when he actually does get a chance to flex his tactical genius on screen by outwitting an opponent in an evenly matched war game, his brilliant solution is invent guns. Which he doesn't even do himself, he just has the idea that guns might be useful, and then someone else makes them for him. As you can see, I was not exaggerating with my Pigman impression. The best thing I can say about this show is it finally made me get around to playing Tyranny, a half-finished Obsidian CRPG, the best kind of Obsidian CRPG, that actually explores all the cool ideas about managing a more equitable evil empire that Strongest Magician just sort of hints at, then leaves on the floor while it goes off to do more anime bullshit. I give it 2 wastebaskets full of Fantasy City zoning maps with obscene doodles just all over them. Before diving headfirst into the real spicy trash, I figured you might appreciate a light, mild appetizer. So the first item on tonight's menu is the wholesome, relaxing, barely spicy at all fantasy slow life goodness of Goodbye Dragon Life. The tale of an ancient dragon who was so lonely and depressed he really didn't mind at all when the humans came to slay him one day, only to find a new lease on life 1,000 years later when he's reborn as a human himself. A human named Dolan, though tragically no one in this world understands how funny that is. It is a surprisingly well-built and immersive world, though, for how low rent some of the visuals are, one where plenty of thought has clearly gone into little things like village customs, cultural relations between fantasy races, the way magic affects local ecosystems, the unique biology of the all-female Lamia race that allows them to mate with any species. Okay, when I say that last one out loud, it does kind of sound like a horny world building thing, but I assure you, it's simply a setup for some very cutesy romance between the ageless Dolan and this fresh-eyed Lamia girl taking her first steps into the world in search of a husband named Selena. Because that's what this show's really all about. Folks from different walks of life learning to live alongside each other and solving small-town problems. Take the captain of the local guard, this gruff and serious guy on the outside who's a real softie deep down, this doting dad and hardcore wife guy who's endlessly proud of the bovine beast woman he managed to marry. That's, well, you know. Oh, wait, they got cows outside. That's where the milk came from. She just phrased it a little weird is all. No, wait again. Now she's asking folks to taste test her daughter's milk. That wouldn't taste any different if she took it out the same cows as her mom. That one's on me. I definitely underestimated the monster f***ers. In my defense, though, that is some totally spies level fetish smuggling, and the cozy fantasy vibe kind of made me lower my guard a bit. It could have happened to anyone. I give Goodbye Dragon Life, hello Lamia wife, 2 barrels full of that guy's wife's milk.
Well, no point going easy on you after that. In fact, I may as well give you some more whiplash while your neck's nice and limber. Out of all the I can't believe it's not isekai substitutes that have passed through this kitchen over the years, the healer who was banished from his party is in fact the strongest, is in fact the blandest. Until all of a sudden, it's just completely fucking insane. It's about this healer, see, whose party kicks him out because all he can use is the basic heal spell. But get this, it turns out he's actually the strongest guy ever, as we find out when this cute martial arts girl, who he rescued from monsters a few years ago, but he doesn't recognize her because her hair's blue now, insists on joining his party despite everyone around her telling her what a fuck up he is. And I do mean everyone. He's basically a local celebrity with a nickname and everything for the sheer scale of his fuck-uppery. Even though he can stack that one heal spell to achieve all the same effects of more powerful healing spells, except for antidotes, which you can just buy antidotes. And also, he's so good at stabbing stuff that he can one-shot orcs, none of which is a secret to any of the folks who've labeled him a fuck-up, by the way. It's just that it never occurred to literally anyone that being able to do two things might be better than only doing one thing? Anyway, very long and boring story short, his old party eventually asked him to come back to help fight the same boss they've been stuck on since they kicked him out. And just when it seems like all hope is lost in that fight, the demon or whatever that's secretly sleeping inside of him awakens or something. And it turns out he can also one-shot hydras. So Timu Gilgamesh over here's all like, hey, bud, let's party up again. Just you, me, and the titty thief. We can even sell that one useless girl into slavery to buy better equipment. But then it turns out that the mysterious masked swordsman who came to help them fight the Hydra was actually an undercover cop, and they get arrested. But then the healer guy's all like, hey, yeah, man, go easy on them. They had, like, hopes and dreams once. They just lost their way is all. What's the little attempted sex trafficking between friends? And the undercover cop's all like, sure, good point, why not? And then he lets him run off like this. And then I stopped watching the show, though I'll probably be subjecting myself to more of it for the worst of year list. I give something healer whatever one dumpster full of soggy self-insert fantasy novels written by Andrew Tate. Here at Chez Garbage, we strive to serve only the finest trash the anime industry has to offer, be it the best of the best or the best of the worst, which is why I never really bothered with the first season of Demon Lord Retry. It was just kind of mid. But when I saw Demon Lord Retry R sitting ugly with a 5.5 out of 10 at the very bottom of MAL, I had to see what went wrong, and I'm pleased to report that it's even worse than I expected. For the uninitiated, like me, Demon Lord Retry is the story of an indie game developer who finds himself reincarnated as the final boss of his own hardcore MMO after he decides to shut the servers down one day, only in a different fantasy world from the one in the game that he made. Sounds an awful lot like Overlord with the serial numbers filed off, except instead of a typical video game villain, this guy acts more like a typical Yakuza. It was never a huge hit, but it did garner a small, dedicated fan base, and that clearly wasn't good enough for the guys making this sequel, because they decided to pretend those fans don't exist and sell the show to a whole new audience. What do I mean? Half the first episode is a beat-for-beat remake of the first episode of the first season, which I guess was kind of warranted because that first season looks like absolute dog shit, but all this new studio managed to make was a different kind of dog shit. Like, if OG Retry was a gritty, lumpy turd, then this is more sloppy, soft-serve diarrhea, meaning the start of this new season gives existing fans literally zero reason to watch it. And not just the first episode. The second one takes us on an aimless wander through Ainzul Gonat Home's fantasy town that he owns as an excuse to recap more stuff from last season and reintroduce all the hot anime girls in his orbit, including the holy maiden in a cross necklace who styles her flamingo pink hair
with a middle bang and 2 side poofs, the holy maiden in cross hairpins who styles her petal pink hair with a middle bang and 4 side poofs, the blonde one, the blonde one, the blonde one, and the horny sociopath doctor. Apologies to any fans of those characters if that roast seemed too mean. The recap just doesn't recap anything that might have made them interesting. But the most baffling thing of all is that after 2 episodes of poorly rehashed content that's sure to filter all but the most dedicated of returning fans, the show suddenly sends its protag off in a carriage ride to a completely different city with 2 completely different waifus from the ones it just spent 40 minutes establishing, who I can only describe as Joke Megumin and Red Yuffie Strife 13.
おじさまの膝とてもカチカチ。妙なことを口走らんよ。これでも舐めておけ。おじさまが甘い。もう私帰っていいかな?
Thereby leaving anyone who might have benefited from all those flashbacks just as in the dark as if they hadn't bothered with them at all. Not that it's particularly difficult to follow if you've seen enough generic isekai slop. I'm just genuinely impressed that they managed to make an anime for literally nobody. Demon Lord Retry R is a full-on 5-alarm medical waste dumpster fire if I've ever seen one. Arifureta Season 3 does a better job getting you caught up to where it's at with like 3 minutes of recap than Retry does with 40, and it picks up with Hajime and his harem tooling around sniping slavers from 30,000 feet in a magic Quinjet that he built with alchemy, and also one of his waifus died and came back as a goddess. The slaver sniping bit is how we're introduced to the latest arc, which finally brings the series' focus back to Shia's Halia tribe and their new guerrilla war against a ruthless beastman trafficking empire. The bunny girls and boys in question are holding their own surprisingly well in the war, thanks to Hajime's combat training from way back when in the anime, but that's not the only thing they've picked up from their Chunibyo edgelord boss.
My name's Lana Infarina, the Swift Gale. I'm known as Nia Seria, the Skybreaker. And I'm Nia Shutatrim of the External Murder.
You can call me Auzelius, the Phantom. And I am Jorgander, the Silent Blade.
Not sure who taught them how to JoJo pose, but I'm definitely not complaining. Hajime is, though, and generally cringing out of his skin, because he never asked to be a red-eyed, silver-haired, eye-patched edgelord. He was simply reborn that way in a monstrous mutation beyond his control, and then lost his eye in battle at a time when the only conveniently available replacement just happened to be a demonic artifact. The eye patch isn't a fashion statement, I swear! The trench coat definitely is, though, but he's never beating those allegations, especially not when he's the kind of dude who would never use his power for the greater good, only for personal gain, because only foolish fools try to be heroes. Which isn't to say that he won't help end Beastman's slavery, just that he's not going to do it because of any moral principle. He's going to do it because it makes his bunny girl co-wife sad. Also, to be fair to Hajime, his position is more that if a strong guy steps in to solve people's problems with force, those problems are just gonna come back as soon as he leaves. And like, I would argue he could probably just give the bunny folk a magic minigun or two, and that would be enough to hold the fort down for a while, but that's still a much more nuanced and compelling excuse than anything Naofumi's ever come up with. I'd make a Virgin Shield hero versus Chad Whitefang Hurricane joke here, but Arifureta already does that for me.
So we're gonna do it outside?
No, we're not doing it.
Oh, you wanna find an inn and get a room?
No, we're not doing it anywhere. Full stop.
I am perpetually astounded by the glow-up this show has enjoyed since its absolute mess of a first season, which I did a whole roast of a few years back that's tragically age-restricted, by the way. Link to that in the doobly-doo, since the FDA will never recommend it to you, and it won't even let me put it in the cards. That's actually why I ended up doing the uncensored Patreon cuts, fun fact, of my menu. The cuts of my...
Anyway, Arifureta is just a ton of dumb fun any way you slice it. An easy 4 golden dumpsters, even with how rough that first season can be. And I might just bump it up to 5 if this one can keep up the quality. But if that still hasn't filled your appetite for gun-toting, trench-coated fantasy edgelords, I've got good news for you. The most notorious talker runs the world's greatest clan. Wait, sorry, that wasn't the news, that was the title of the anime that the news was about, which, as you might have guessed, is a pretty darn edgy one. Not quite as edgy as last season's Failure Frame, but on a scale from Hamtaro to Elfen Lied, the first arc ends with protag Noel Stolen selling his own party members into slavery because they stole his money, including a woman who was secretly in love with him, because literally every woman is secretly in love with him, including the little girl whose dad's eye he gouges out at the end of the second arc because that dad tried to poison him to get out of paying a quest bounty. So definitely up there in the edge department. In fact, Alma, the main woman who's in love with him's backstory, is that she murdered her own father as revenge for him murdering all of his other children as part of an Endeavor-style secret project to create the world's deadliest assassin ever, because he never got over being only the second strongest guy in the world next to the world's deadliest warrior ever, who happens to be the protagonist's granddad and mentor. But then, tragically, when she had no family left in the world, she got kicked out of the Assassin's Guild, turned away from the only life she's ever known, because that outfit clearly doesn't have enough ass emphasis. If anything, she's more of a tits-assassin. That is, of course, a joke, which I had to lead with so you'd know I'm not joking when I tell you the real reason she was rejected is because she's too edgy for the Assassin's Guild.
Aruma, 正直に言おう。これからの教団に君の居場所はない。君の心には修羅が眠っている。君は教団にとって危険だ。
If you can avoid cutting yourself on all of that, though, there is a surprising amount to like about this series. Its grimdark world full of terrible, selfish people has a kind of steampunky vibe for starters, and also they got these cute little mouse guys driving all the carriages, so clearly can't be all bad. Also, quite a bit more thought than you might expect went into developing its RPG-style power system, and in particular the tactical and even legal nuances of Noel's Pucker power set, which allows him to buff his teammates by shouting combat orders and do some light mind control, hence why there need to be some legal restrictions on how he can use those powers. And obviously, that's still crazy overpowered, despite the fact that everyone in the world thinks it's really underpowered for some reason, like every fantasy protag's power set these days. But it's OP in a way I haven't seen a million times before, which is worth a lot. And Noel's goal of going from 0 to state-sanctioned airship-licensed clan master in under a year provides a meaningful sense of progression and direction from arc to arc that's usually missing in these sorts of edgy power fantasy things. It's not a great anime by any stretch, but it understood the assignment, and that alone is enough to earn it 4 wastebaskets full of pages from a Todo Deku dark fantasy het AU fanfic, which are on fire because Bakugo wrote them. Even now that you've had your fill of trench-coated fantasy edgelords, though, I've got a feeling you still might be craving some more of my patented, absurdly specific segues, which is why I've had the chefs in back line up a second serving of underpowered fantasy adventurer running the world's most powerful clan while all the ladies chase his dick anime for you to enjoy tonight. Let this grieving soul retire. And when I say underpowered, I actually mean it this time. Cry Andri doesn't have some underrated skill that everyone thinks sucks because they just haven't figured out the right way to use it yet. He actually just straight up sucks at being an adventurer. However, he did have the astounding misfortune to be childhood friends with 6 of the most overpowered adventurers on the whole planet, all of whom think very highly of him for no apparent reason. So despite his repeated insistence that he's really not cut out for this and almost died back there actually, and please guys, I think it'd be best if I just went back home and got a normal job already, they have decided to make him the leader of their elite adventuring party, Grieving Souls, which he
picked that stupid edgelord name for in hopes that that would finally make them fire him, and also all of the other elite parties that have joined their clan under them. And at this point, he's kind of just got so much riding on his hilariously underqualified ass that he's just got to run with it, stay behind his desk as much as possible, and hope he doesn't get himself or one of his many subordinates who inexplicably look up to him killed. Especially not the cute apprentice thief in the booty shorts who assumes his every f*** up is part of some as yet unrevealed master plan and constantly rides his dick for it.
使徒一人じゃ死んじゃうかもしれないじゃん。ねえ、私心配なの。だから。
No, sorry, I meant metaphorical dick riding. Also, wrong booty shorts thief. The one thing he has going for him is that over the years, he's amassed quite the collection of extremely dangerous and over-specialized magic artifacts, which he uses judiciously to make up for his complete lack of actual skill. And that lends the show's action a very fun improvisational feel that gels really well with its comedy. I give Let This Grieving Soul Retire 3 flaming banana stands. Now, I could keep on segueing like this all day, but before we get to our last anime about a guy with garbage stats and skills and not many friends who's more successful than you'd expect, I want to shift gears a sec and tell you about our choice selection of trash for her. Because here at Chez Garbage, we believe the ladies deserve sloppily animated and written, shamelessly indulgent isekai power fantasies about insanely OP characters with dark hair hanging down between their eyes, surrounded by attractive members of the opposite sex, just as much as us boys. Hey, guess I had one last segue in me after all. When I say sloppily animated and sloppily written, I mean brace yourself, because I'll Become a Villainess Who Goes Down in History is a real diamond in the rough, emphasis on rough. Also, it's more of a cubic zirconia, really, and I feel like I still haven't emphasized the rough part of that sentence nearly enough. The characters spend more time off-model than on. The action scenes look like the animators got drunk and filmed themselves for reference before getting even more drunk to actually draw it. The script is insanely contrived, with several plot points involving the king holding a personal audience with the heads of all the major noble houses present to ask a 7-year-old girl's opinion on foreign policy, and the main love interest's name is Prince Duke. Also, it's not really a flaw per se, but whenever Alicia tries to sound like a villainess, she just ends up spouting off basic theory, and I'm not sure how I should feel about that.
経済力は高いですが、富の大半は貴族に集中しており、貧富の差が深刻です。
But if you can look past all those things, what you'll find is, for once, a villainous anime about an isekai Otome gamer who actually wants to be a villainess and succeed where her in-game counterpart failed, instead of just avoiding death flags by being nicer. Mostly motivated by the fact that she just fucking hates the game's goody two-shoes heroine, and while at first that seems like just being a hater for hating's sake, which is plenty fun in its own right, it slowly becomes clear that said heroine's self-righteous hero complex, combined with her way too much unearned power for any teenager to responsibly wield, make her a genuine menace who needs to be kept in check. A very interesting dynamic that brings to mind the Traveler's Gate trilogy, though maybe that's just because I've been on a Will White audiobook binge ever since getting hooked on the Cradle series. Anyway, I'll Become a Villainess gets 3 wastebaskets packed with saucy drawings of your problematic husbandos that you drew when you were 10. But if you like the sound of that, then you're gonna love The Do-Over Damsel Conquers the Dragon Emperor, a non-isekai power fantasy where the action scenes look as cool as they deserve, and the heroine's hottie of choice hasn't been mangled into a Picasso painting of himself. Jill Savelle, a mighty magic swordswoman known throughout her kingdom as the Goddess of War, is shocked to see the very nation she swore to protect turn against her after she finds her fiancé, Crown Prince Gerald, in bed with his own sister, and he frames her for attempted murder in order to shut her up. Right before she dies, though, she finds herself thrust back into her 10-year-old body on the night of their betrothal and vows vows not to let herself end up with that incest freak sociopath again, even if that means declaring her undying love for the first other guy she bumps into. Unfortunately, that guy turns out to be Hades Tios Rave, avatar of the dragon god and teenage emperor of a neighboring nation who's destined to carve a path of blood and fire across the kingdom in the very same war that will make her a hero. Even more unfortunately, in stark contrast to the murdering madman she saw on the battlefield, he is a profoundly lonely and romantically inept man who immediately and enthusiastically accepts the small girl's on-the-spot proposal, which worries her for a lot of reasons, not the least of which being that she just got away from that cis-con freak fiancé and isn't exactly excited to end up with another kind of con.
私はその年齢的に
理想的だ。
Don't worry though, after a bit more talking, it quickly becomes clear he's actually so much of a cinnamon roll he just legitimately doesn't realize how that sounded.
しかし、お世継ぎの問題とか。
世継ぎ？出会ったばかりでそんな話なんてどうかと思うな。
Also, it turns out the dragon god is this impossibly lovable little Pokemon type guy, so all things considered, she's kind of stumbled literally ass backwards into living the shoujo dream. But with war and tragedy looming in the near future, that dream could swiftly become a new nightmare. So Jill's got to do everything in her power to protect her new life and her himbo husbando from all the forces arrayed against them. Though, since everything in her power includes throwing entire warships clear over the horizon and punching cannonballs barehanded, her chances are better than you might expect. I give Do-Over Damsel 5 carefully organized folders of saucy art of your problematic husbandos that you commissioned from professional artists with money from your grown-up job. But now that that's cleansed your palate of all the overwhelming fantasy flavors we've enjoyed tonight, it's time to appreciate the surprisingly complex taste of our last piece of isekai trash. Loner Life in Another World is another one of them isekai things about a class loner who gets isekai'd alongside all his peers, but ends up rolling the worst skills out of all of them, which later allow him to become the strongest guy ever. Clearly, it's inspired by Arifureta. Protag-kun's even canonically an Arifureta fan, but one thing it doesn't borrow from its inspiration is all of that edge. Haruka isn't a loner because he's ostracized or bullied for starters, or even because he doesn't like other people. He kind of just does his own thing because he enjoys solitude. And he doesn't end up with weak skills as a reflection of how life isn't fair or whatever. He hid in the rafters when the isekai portal popped up because it seemed like it was going to be a pain in the ass, so he ended up getting overlooked by God when all the cheat skills and equipment were handed out on a first-come, first-served basis, and got stuck with all the leftovers after complaining about it too much, including some that genuinely do suck ass, though there are a few good ones that just weren't picked because they have really stupid sounding names. But the fact that he's got so many of them allows him to find surprisingly strong synergies between those crap skills, which is a small but meaningful distinction from all the fantasy anime crap out there where everyone around Protag-kun is just too goddamn stupid to realize that his obviously good power is obviously good. This is one of the few stat screen isekai that doesn't get me instantly reaching for my phone the second someone pulls up their stat screen, and that is a sign of deceptively good writing. Which is something I never thought I'd say when I started watching this show and saw all the classmates divided into cliques like the nerds and the girls with character names like Nerd A, Bimbo B, Running Jock, Artsy Girl, Big Dumb Jock, and Class Rep. Before long, though, I realized that wasn't lazy writing at all, but a strong stylistic choice. Subtle characterization for Haruka, who actively avoids using even the names of his friends in class as a way of
putting up a wall around himself and creating distance from other people. There's a shocking amount of depth to these characters, so much so you might even start thinking this anime isn't trash at all. But then the class rep will do something like accidentally use her hijack skill to steal the super horny ability of some goblin she murders, and you're reminded that this anime knows exactly what it is, and it's having a ton of fun with it. On that note, I have it on good authority that at some point in the near future, Haruka is gonna fuck a skeleton. So, you're gonna want to be around for that. I give Loner Life in Another World 3 golden dumpsters.